The sun hung low over Ashwood Valley like a copper penny someone forgot to collect, and Wade Mercer's throat tasted like trail dust and regret. Ranger, 15 hands of stubborn gray gelding, had started favoring his left foreleg 2 miles back, which meant Wade's plan to reach the Northern Territories before winter was now officially shot to hell. The forgotten creek he'd marked on a trader's map 3 weeks ago was supposed to be nothing more than a brief stop, a chance to refill canteens and let Ranger rest before pushing through the mountain pass. But God and circumstance had other ideas. Wade saw the ranch first, weathered fence posts leaning like tired old men, a barn that had seen better decades, and a house with fresh split firewood stacked against the northern wall. Someone still lived here. Someone still cared. The creek ran silver through the property's eastern edge, cutting through grassland that hadn't been overgrazed, hadn't been abandoned. This was a working ranch, barely, held together by will and whatever strength remained after the valley had clearly tried to break it. Then he saw the riders. 3 men on horseback, arranged in a semicircle facing the house like wolves who'd already tasted blood. Wade's hand drifted toward his hip, fingers brushing the walnut grip of his Colt before his mind caught up with instinct. None of the riders had noticed him yet. They were focused on the front porch, where a woman stood with her spine straight and her hands clenched, and beside her, a child. Maybe 7 years old, clutching a rag doll with button eyes. Wade pulled Ranger to a stop beneath a cottonwood, staying in the shade, watching. Every scrap of common sense he'd accumulated over 32 years of hard living told him to water his horse downstream and keep riding. Other people's troubles were quicksand. You step in, you don't step out. But Ranger's ears had already swiveled forward, locked onto the scene below, like the horse understood something Wade was still pretending he didn't. "We've been more than patient, Mrs. Rowan." The voice belonged to the center rider. Broad shoulders, dust-brown duster, a face that probably looked friendly when he wanted it to. Right now it didn't. "Mr. Sloan made you a fair offer. Better than fair, considering your circumstances." The woman, Mrs. Rowan, didn't move. "I'm not interested in Mr. Sloan's offers. This land belongs to my family." "Belonged to your husband," the rider corrected, and Wade heard the practiced cruelty in how he shaped the word. "Past tense, Daniel's been gone 6 months. You've got winter coming, a daughter to feed, and debts that aren't getting any smaller. Sign the papers, take the money, and start fresh somewhere easier." "No." Just that. One word, flat and final. The rider to the left, younger, with a poorly trimmed mustache and gun leather too new to be trusted, shifted in his saddle. "Ma'am, we're trying to be gentlemen about this." "Gentlemen don't show up 3-to-1 at a widow's door." Mrs. Rowan's voice carried across the yard, and Wade recognized the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from fighting battles you're expected to lose. "And they don't threaten children while pretending it's business." The third rider, who'd stayed silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was quieter, which somehow made it worse. "Sign the papers, Eliza. We're not asking anymore." The little girl, Nora, Wade would learn later, pressed closer to her mother's leg. Her boots were at least 2 sizes too big, probably hand-me-downs or bought with the hope she'd grow into them. The doll in her arms had seen better years, its fabric body patched with mismatched thread. Wade had seen this play out before. Different valley, different widow, same ending. The riders would apply pressure until something broke. Property, pride, or bones. They'd take what they wanted and call it legal. Some lawyer in a clean suit would file papers in a courthouse 2 counties away, and by the time anyone noticed the signatures were forged or coerced, the land would already be fenced and sold. "Keep riding," the smart part of Wade's brain insisted. "This isn't your fight." But Ranger had already started walking toward the ranch, and Wade's hands on the reins weren't pulling him back. The center rider noticed him first, head swiveling, shoulders squaring, right hand drifting toward his holster with the casual confidence of someone who'd practiced the motion more than he'd needed to use it. "Help you with something, friend?" Wade kept Ranger at a walk, slow and easy, hands visible on the saddle horn. "Saw the creek from the road. Horse is lame. Thought I'd ask permission to water him before moving on." "Creek's private property." The young one with the bad mustache spoke up, eager. "You'll need to ride to town if you're thirsty." "Town's 8 miles back," Wade said mildly. "Horse won't make it." Mrs. Rowan's eyes found Wade's, and something passed between them, a question he hadn't quite answered yet, even to himself. She looked at Ranger, then at Wade's face, reading something there. You can use the creek, she said, her voice steady despite everything. Eastern Trough. Help yourself. The center rider's jaw tightened. Ma'am, we're in the middle of important business. The man's horse is lame. Mrs. Rowan cut him off without raising her voice. I'm not so desperate that I deny water to an animal. You want to discuss contracts and papers, we'll wait until he's finished. It was a temporary reprieve, tissue-thin and transparent, but Wade recognized it for what it was, a drowning person reaching for anything that floated. He touched his hat brim. Much obliged, ma'am. He dismounted near the trough, making a show of checking Ranger's hoof while listening to everything happening 40 feet away. The riders had shifted their horses slightly, uncertain whether Wade was a complication or just an inconvenient witness. The little girl watched him over her mother's hip, button-bright eyes in a dirt-smudged face. We'll give you one more week to think it over, the center rider said finally, refolding papers that had never left his saddlebag. But Mr. Sloan's patience has limits, and we're not the worst men he could send next time. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Mrs. Rowan didn't blink. Tell Mr. Sloan I said no 6 months ago, no last week, and no today. The answer isn't going to change because you keep asking louder. The riders exchanged glances, a whole conversation in small movements. The quiet one nodded slightly. The young one looked disappointed. The center rider's expression hardened into something Wade had seen too many times before, the look of a man who'd been given permission to stop being polite. 1 week, he repeated. After that, this stops being your decision. They turned their horses and rode west toward the main road, dust trailing behind them like a bad omen. Wade stayed by the trough, one hand on Ranger's neck, waiting until the riders disappeared over the hill before he let himself breathe normally again. Mrs. Rowan hadn't moved from the porch. The little girl still clung to her skirt. They watched Wade like people who'd learned not to trust kindness without checking for the catch first. Wade straightened slowly, hands away from his guns. Your horse trough's got good water. That's because my husband built it right. Her voice was different now, tired, angry, scared, all of it bleeding through the cracks. You planning to water your horse and leave, or were you listening close enough to have questions? Wade could have lied. Should have lied. Instead, he said, I heard enough to know those men aren't coming back with lawyers. Mrs. Rowan's laugh was bitter and short. No, they're not. Nora tugged her mother's sleeve. Mama, is the man staying? No, sweetheart, he's just passing through. The little girl looked at Wade with the unnerving directness children have before life teaches them to look away. Are you scared of those men? Nora? Mrs. Rowan started. It's all right, Wade said. He crouched down so he was eye level with the kid, which put him closer to honest. Yeah, I'm scared of them, scared of what they'll do if someone doesn't stop them. You scared too? Nora nodded slowly. That's smart, Wade told her. Fear keeps you careful. It's the people who aren't scared that usually get hurt worst. Mrs. Rowan studied him with the exhausted wariness of someone who'd already buried one man and didn't have strength left for complicated. What's your name, stranger? Wade Mercer. I'm Eliza Rowan. This is my daughter Nora, and this land is Rowan Ranch, or what's left of it. She gestured toward the sagging barn, the patched fence, the house that was clean but worn down to bare wood in places. My husband Daniel died last spring, thrown from a horse, broke his neck. Ever since then, Victor Sloan's been trying to buy our water rights. Started polite, got less polite, and now... She trailed off, looking at the dust cloud still visible on the horizon. Who's Victor Sloan? Land broker, calls himself a businessman, owns half of Ashwood Valley through purchases and other arrangements. Wants our creek because it feeds into Blackwater River, which supplies most of the ranches east of here. You control the water. You control everything, Wade finished. It was an old story, mean and simple. Eliza nodded. Those men work for him. They've been here 4 times in the past month, each visit a little less friendly than the last. Today they brought papers claiming legal ownership of my water rights, said Daniel signed them before he died. Her hands clenched. Daniel died March 14th. The signature on those documents is dated April 2nd. Wade felt something cold settle in his chest. You're saying it's forged. I'm saying my husband couldn't sign papers 3 weeks after he was already in the ground. Eliza's voice cracked slightly, the first real break in her armor. But Mr. Sloan has lawyers and judges and official seals And I have a daughter, a dying ranch, and no proof beyond my word that those signatures are lies. Ranger nudged Wade's shoulder. Not subtle, never subtle, and Wade realized he'd been standing there too long, thinking too hard about problems that weren't his to solve. The Northern Territories were waiting. Winter was coming. He had his own survival to worry about. I should go, he said, and meant it. Yes, Eliza agreed. You should. Neither of them moved. Nora looked between them, clutching her doll tighter. Mama, can the man stay for supper? He looks hungry. Nora, I am hungry, Wade admitted, because apparently his mouth had declared independence from his brain. But I don't want to impose. It's not imposing if you're invited. Eliza's smile was thin and didn't reach her eyes, but it was genuine. And honestly, Mr. Mercer, I'd rather have supper with a stranger who asked permission to use my creek than spend another evening wondering when Sloan's men will come back and stop pretending this is negotiable. That's how Wade Mercer, who'd planned to water his horse and disappear, ended up sitting at Eliza Rowan's kitchen table while Nora chattered about her chickens, and Eliza served stew that was more potatoes than meat, but seasoned well enough that hunger made it taste like prosperity. The house was clean but sparse, furniture that had been good quality once, now worn down by use and time. A photograph on the mantel showed a younger Eliza standing beside a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes and work-hardened hands. Daniel, Wade assumed. Dead at 30-something from a fall that might have been an accident or might not have been. Wade had learned not to believe in coincidences around disputed land. How long you been riding? Eliza asked, serving herself last like mothers do. Long enough. That's a non-answer. It's the only answer I've got. Wade met her eyes across the table. I'm not running from the law, if that's what you're worried about, but I'm not exactly running toward anything either, just moving. Must be lonely. Sometimes. Wade watched Nora draw patterns in her stew with a spoon. Sometimes it's safer. Eliza understood. He could see it in how her shoulders relaxed fractionally. She wasn't asking him to be a hero. She was just trying to make it through one more day without losing everything. After dinner, Wade insisted on checking the property's perimeter while there was still light. Eliza didn't argue. They both knew he wasn't doing it out of courtesy. He was doing it because those riders would come back, and when they did, Wade wanted to know where the weak points were. The ranch was bigger than it looked from the road, nearly 40 acres of usable land, plus another 60 of rougher territory that could support cattle if someone had money for stock. The creek ran year-round, cold and clean, fed by mountain snowmelt even in late summer. Wade walked its length and understood immediately why Sloan wanted it. Control this water, and you controlled the entire Eastern Valley's irrigation. The barn was in worse shape than the house, roof patched with mismatched boards, northern wall listing slightly where the foundation had shifted. But the structure was sound enough, and someone had recently rehung the main door. Daniel's work, probably, or Eliza's after he'd died. Wade found himself respecting that, the quiet stubbornness of maintaining what you could when everything else was falling apart. Ranger had made friends with a sway-backed mare in the corral, both horses standing nose to nose in that way animals have of finding companionship without complication. Wade envied them that simplicity. When he returned to the house, full dark had settled over the valley. Eliza was on the porch with a rifle across her lap. Old Henry repeater, well-maintained but probably older than she was. She looked up as Wade's boots hit the steps. Find anything? Western fence line needs repair. Someone cut the wire clean through, probably last week. And there's fresh tracks near the creek, 3 riders, same as today, circling your property like they're mapping exits. Eliza's jaw tightened. Reconnaissance. Or intimidation. Wade leaned against the porch rail, watching fireflies start their evening dance across the dark grass. They want you scared enough to sign before they have to get violent. Easier to steal land with paperwork than bullets. Will you stay? The question came out flat, without hope or expectation. Just tonight. I'll pay you what I can. No. Eliza nodded, unsurprised. Then thank you for supper and the warning. There's a bedroll in the barn if you want to sleep inside before heading out tomorrow. Wade should have said yes. Should have taken the bedroll, slept a few hours, and ridden out before dawn. Instead, he heard himself say, "Those papers they showed you, you still have them?" Eliza's expression shifted. hope carefully contained like something fragile she couldn't afford to break. They left copies, said I needed to review the legal language before signing. Can I see them? 5 minutes later, Wade sat at the kitchen table under lamplight, studying documents that looked official enough to fool anyone who didn't know what to look for. Watermarked paper, legal stamps, notary seals, all the window dressing of legitimacy wrapped around a poisonous core. Here, Wade pointed to the signature line. Daniel Rowan, April 2nd, 1884. You said he died March 14th, the day after his birthday. Eliza's voice was quiet. I buried him on the 16th. There were witnesses. Half the valley came to the funeral. Wade studied the signature itself. It was good work, whoever forged it. Confident strokes, natural pressure. But there was something off about the capital R in Rowan, a flourish that didn't quite match the rest of the name. He'd seen enough forged documents to recognize the tells. This is federal fraud, Wade said slowly. Not just crooked business. If you can prove your husband died before this date, anyone who used these documents to claim property is looking at prison time. I have his death certificate and the pastor's records from the funeral. That might be enough. Wade looked up, meeting Eliza's eyes. But you'll need more than papers to fight Sloan. He's got lawyers who'll bury you in legal fees while his men persuade witnesses to forget what they saw. You need someone who can make this complicated enough that walking away looks smarter than pushing forward. Someone like you? I'm not a lawyer. No, Eliza agreed. But you're someone who noticed 3 men threatening a widow and decided it was worth stopping for. That makes you either stupid or decent, and I'm hoping it's the second one. Wade laughed despite himself, short and surprised. Might be both. Then stay. Please. Eliza's exhaustion finally showed through completely, all her careful strength crumbling at the edges. I can't pay you much. I can offer meals and a roof and whatever's left in Daniel's savings after I make it through winter. But if you leave tomorrow, Sloan's men will come back the day after, and the day after that, until Nora and I are gone or worse. I need... Her voice caught. I need someone who will stand between them and my daughter long enough for me to figure out how to win this. Nora appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, still wearing boots too big for her feet. Is the man leaving, Mama? Eliza looked at Wade. Wade looked at Nora. Ranger, visible through the window in the moonlit corral, lifted his head like he'd already made the decision and was waiting for the human to catch up. No, Wade heard himself say, and felt the last threads of smart self-preservation snap like old rope. I'm not leaving, not yet. Nora smiled, gap-toothed and genuine, and shuffled back to bed. Eliza's shoulders dropped 2 inches, relief making her look younger and more breakable than before. Thank you, she whispered. Wade nodded, already calculating how badly this decision would cost him, already knowing he'd make it anyway. Because some fights you walk away from, and some fights walk away from you if you don't meet them head on. Tomorrow he'd ride into town and start asking questions about Victor Sloan. Tonight he'd sleep in the barn with one gun under his saddle and one ear open for the sound of approaching horses. The Northern Territories could wait. Ashwood Valley had problems that needed solving first. Wade woke to the sound of chickens raising hell and Nora's voice trying to calm them through the barn wall. Gray dawn light filtered through gaps in the roof boards, and his back complained about another night on hard ground, despite the bedroll Eliza had provided. Ranger stood in the corner stall, ears forward, already alert to whatever commotion had started the day early. Wade pulled on his boots and checked both revolvers before stepping outside. Old habits from older trouble. Nora stood in the chicken yard wearing a nightgown tucked into those oversized boots, holding a basket with 3 eggs and looking furious at the rooster who'd apparently decided to be difficult. The bird strutted near the fence line, red comb standing up like a challenge. He's being mean again, Nora announced when she saw Wade. Mama says he's protecting his ladies, but I think he just likes being awful. Wade bit back a smile. Some roosters are like that. You want help? I can do it myself. She marched toward the rooster with more confidence than strategy. The bird flared his wings and made a sound like rusty machinery. Nora stopped, reconsidered, then looked back at Wade. Maybe you could distract him while I get the eggs from the far nest. That's called tactics, Wade said. Smart thinking. He moved left while Nora circled right, and the rooster, faced with two targets, chose to strut angrily in place rather than commit to either. Nora grabbed 2 more eggs from the disputed nest box and retreated quickly, grinning like she'd won a gunfight. "Got 'em!" "I saw. Your mother teach you to think like that?" "Papa did. Before." Nora's smile faded slightly, the way children's do when they remember something's missing. "He said every problem has a back door if you're smart enough to find it." Wade thought about Daniel Rowan, dead at 30-something, buried with half the valley watching, his signature forged 3 weeks later to steal his land. "Your papa sounds like he was a smart man." "He was the best." Nora adjusted her egg basket carefully. "Mama says you're staying to help us." "Are you?" "For a while." "How long's a while?" "Don't know yet." Nora studied him with that unnerving directness again. "The bad men are coming back, aren't they?" Wade considered lying, decided she'd earned better. "Probably." "Will you shoot them?" "Rather not have to." "But you will if you need to?" "Yes." Nora nodded like this was a satisfactory answer and headed toward the house. Wade followed, wondering when exactly 7-year-olds had started conducting interviews like railroad detectives. Eliza was already awake, dressed in work clothes that had been patched and repatched, her hair pulled back in a braid that was coming loose at the ends. She looked like she'd slept about as well as Wade had, which was to say, hardly at all. Coffee sat brewing on the stove. Real coffee, not the chicory substitute most struggling ranches made do with. "You didn't have to use your good coffee on me," Wade said. "It's not good coffee. It's adequate coffee I've been stretching for 3 months. Eliza poured 2 cups anyway. "But if I'm asking a stranger to risk his neck for my problems, least I can do is offer him something stronger than creek water." They sat at the kitchen table while Nora fed the chickens outside. Morning light made the room look tired. Walls that needed paint, floorboards worn smooth in traffic patterns, curtains that had been nice once. But everything was clean, organized, held together through sheer determination. "I want to ride into town this morning," Wade said. "Ask some questions about Victor Sloan. Find out what I'm actually dealing with before those riders come back." Eliza's hands tightened around her coffee cup. "Town's not friendly toward questions about Sloan. Half the businesses owe him money, other half work for him directly. The sheriff's on his payroll, and the mayor's his brother-in-law." "Anyone in town not connected to Sloan?" "Pastor Williams at the church. He performed Daniel's funeral, kept records. And there's Margaret Chen, runs the general store with her husband. They've been here longer than Sloan, remember when the valley wasn't all his. But they're careful. Everyone is." Wade nodded slowly. "What about the land office? County records?" "Ashwood doesn't have a county seat. We're part of Hollister County, 20 miles south. Records office is there, but it's a 2-day ride round trip." "Then that's where I'll go after I see what town looks like." Eliza set down her cup, meeting his eyes across scarred wood. "Why are you doing this?" "Real reason. You don't know me, don't owe me anything. Most men would have watered their horse and ridden on." Wade thought about that, really thought about it, because she deserved an honest answer, even if he wasn't sure he had one. "I spent 10 years riding away from other people's problems, told myself it was smart, keeping my head down, staying clear of trouble that wasn't mine to fix. But somewhere along the line, all that riding away started feeling less like wisdom and more like cowardice." "You're not a coward." "Maybe not, but I'm not a hero either. I'm just—" He gestured vaguely, searching for words that didn't sound like justification. "I'm just tired of watching bad men take things from people who can't fight back. And your daughter asked if I was staying with the kind of hope that breaks if you disappoint it. So here I am." Eliza's expression softened slightly. "You're a strange man, Wade Mercer." "Been told that before." "I mean it as a compliment." Wade stood, draining the last of his coffee. "I'll be back before dark. You still have that Henry rifle?" "Always." "Keep it loaded. Keep Nora inside. Anyone comes by who isn't me, you don't answer the door." Eliza rose as well, walking him to the door. On the porch she hesitated, then said quietly, "Daniel used to say there were 2 kinds of men in the world. Those who'd help a stranger, and those who'd rob him. He always tried to be the first kind, even when it cost him." "Cost him his life, sounds like." "Maybe. Or maybe he just got unlucky with a spooked horse." But Eliza's tone said she didn't believe that any more than Wade did. "Either way, I'm glad you're the first kind too. Wade touched his hat brim and walked to the barn where Ranger waited, already sensing travel. The horse had recovered from yesterday's lameness. Probably wasn't lame at all, Wade suspected. Just stubborn about continuing north when there was trouble brewing south. Animals had instincts about these things. The ride into Ashwood took 40 minutes through country that would have been beautiful if Wade had been in the mood to appreciate it. Rolling hills still green despite late summer heat, stands of oak and cottonwood following creek lines, mountains rising purple-gray in the distance. Good ranching country. Worth fighting for. Worth killing for, apparently. Ashwood wasn't much. A main street with maybe 20 buildings, half of them looking recent compared to the older structures that probably dated back to when the valley was first settled. The general store sat on the corner, Chen's Mercantile painted on a sign that had seen better decades. A saloon called the Silver Creek occupied prime real estate across from the sheriff's office. Bank, livery, boarding house, undertaker, all the necessary pieces of a small western town trying to decide if it would grow or die. Wade tied Ranger outside the general store and went inside. The place smelled like coffee, leather, and the particular dust that accumulates in buildings that have stood a long time. Shelves lined the walls, goods stacked neat but sparse. The kind of inventory that suggested money was tight and deliveries uncertain. A Chinese woman in her 50s stood behind the counter, reviewing a ledger with the focused intensity of someone who'd done this calculation too many times and kept getting the same bad answer. She looked up as Wade entered, and her expression shifted through several variations of careful before settling on neutral courtesy. "Help you? Margaret Chen? Depends who's asking." "Wade Mercer. Eliza Rowan sent me." Margaret's face tightened almost imperceptibly. She glanced toward the door, then back to Wade. "Eliza should be more careful about the company she keeps." "That a warning?" "That's advice from someone who's lived here longer than you've been breathing." Margaret closed her ledger with deliberate precision. "What do you want?" "Information about Victor Sloan." "Then you're in the wrong store. Try the Silver Creek. Plenty of men there happy to tell you how wonderful Mr. Sloan is for Ashwood Valley." Her tone made it clear what she thought of those opinions. Wade leaned against the counter, keeping his voice low. "Eliza showed me papers claiming her husband signed away water rights 3 weeks after he was already dead. That's federal fraud, and it means Sloan's been doing this to other people too. I need to know how many, how long, and who else is involved." Margaret studied him for a long moment, weighing something internal. Finally, she said, "My husband's in the back. He doesn't hear well anymore, which is sometimes convenient. You have 5 minutes before someone notices you're in here talking to me." She moved to a shelf and made a show of helping Wade select tobacco he didn't need while speaking quietly enough that her voice wouldn't carry beyond the immediate area. Victor Sloan came to Ashwood 6 years ago with money from back east and plans to develop the valley. At first it was legitimate, bought the old Morrison Ranch fair and square, brought in investors, talked about irrigation projects and railway expansion. People were hopeful. Then about 3 years ago, things changed. What changed? The purchases stopped being voluntary. Sloan started using legal pressure, old debts called in suddenly, property taxes nobody could afford, liens that appeared out of nowhere. Families who'd been here for 20 years found themselves owing money they didn't actually owe, and the only buyer offering to clear those debts was Sloan. Wade felt something cold settle in his gut. "How many ranches?" "At least 11 that I know of, maybe more. Sloan owns or controls about 60% of the valley now, either directly or through proxy companies, but it's not enough. He wants the water." "Blackwater River." Margaret nodded grimly. "Controls the Eastern Valley irrigation. Most ranches depend on it for summer water when the smaller creeks run low. Eliza's property sits on the main tributary. If Sloan gets that, he effectively controls who drinks and who doesn't." "And the law?" "Sheriff Dalton takes Sloan's money and looks the other way. Mayor Harrison's married to Sloan's sister. County judge in Hollister is either bought or scared, I'm not sure which. The whole system's rotted through." "What about the families Sloan pushed out? Where'd they go?" "Some moved on. Some are still in the valley, working as hired hands on the land they used to own. Some—" Margaret paused, her expression darkening. "Tom Garrett refused to sell. Had a ranch north of here, good water, prime grazing. He was found dead last year, supposed accident involving his wagon and a spooked team. His widow signed the papers 2 weeks later." Wade's jaw tightened. "Accident." That's what the sheriff said. That's what everyone says when they want to keep breathing. Margaret rang up the tobacco Wade didn't want, speaking in a normal voice now as footsteps approached outside. That'll be 40 cents. Wade paid, tipping his hat as the door opened and two men entered. Ranch hands by their clothes, one of them wearing a gun belt with too much confidence. They looked at Wade, then at Margaret, calculating something. "Ma'am," Wade said pleasantly, and left before the silence got heavier. Back outside, Ashwood looked the same but felt different. Every storefront was a trap door. Every friendly face had teeth underneath. Wade recognized this kind of town. He'd ridden through enough of them, places where the wrong question got you buried in an unmarked grave, and everyone pretended it was your own fault for asking. The church sat on the east end of town, white-clapboard with a modest steeple and windows that probably let in nice light on Sunday mornings. Wade found Pastor Williams in the small cemetery behind the building, tending graves with the careful attention of someone who took the work personally. He was younger than Wade expected, maybe 40, with wire-rimmed glasses and the build of a man who'd done physical labor before finding religion. He looked up as Wade approached, friendly but cautious. "Help you, son?" "Wade Mercer. I'm staying out at the Rowan Ranch. Eliza said you might have records from her husband's funeral." Pastor Williams' expression shifted, not unfriendly, but distinctly uncomfortable. He set down his trowel and stood, brushing dirt from his knees. "I do. Why?" "Because men are trying to claim Daniel signed papers after he was already dead, and I need proof of the timeline." The pastor's face tightened. "You're talking about Victor Sloan's people. I'm talking about fraud. Son, I appreciate your concern for Mrs. Rowan, but getting involved in disputes between her and Mr. Sloan is dangerous business. This valley has seen enough trouble." "It's about to see more," Wade interrupted. "Those riders aren't asking anymore. They're demanding, and when demanding doesn't work, they'll move to something worse. I've seen how this plays out." Pastor Williams removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. Buying time to think, Wade recognized. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. "I keep detailed records of every service I perform. Baptisms, weddings, funerals. Daniel Rowan was laid to rest March 16, 1884. I presided over the service myself. There were 47 witnesses, including most of the remaining independent ranchers in the valley. I'll need a certified copy of those records." "For what purpose?" "To prove Sloan's papers are forgeries. To stop him from stealing Eliza's ranch the way he's stolen 11 others." The pastor put his glasses back on, meeting Wade's eyes directly. "You understand what you're asking? If I provide those records and you use them against Sloan, I become complicit in your fight. This church serves everyone in the valley. I can't afford to take sides. You already took sides when you buried Daniel Rowan and wrote down the date. I'm just asking you to stand by what you recorded." Pastor Williams looked at the graves around them, names and dates carved in simple stone, lives reduced to numbers. Daniel was a good man. He deserved better than what happened to him. So does his widow. So does his daughter. The pastor nodded slowly, something settling in his expression like a decision he'd been avoiding. "Come to the rectory. I'll make you a copy of the funeral records. But Mr. Mercer, once you start this fight, you need to finish it. Sloan doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget. You'll have made yourself his enemy." "Reckon I did that when I decided to stay at Eliza's ranch." Inside the small rectory office, Pastor Williams pulled out a leather-bound record book and carefully copied the relevant page. Daniel Rowan's name, date of death, funeral service details, list of attendees. He signed and dated the copy, then added a note certifying its accuracy. "This won't stop Sloan," he said, handing Wade the paper. "He has lawyers who can argue around facts that don't suit them. It's a start." Wade folded the document carefully. "Who else has Sloan pushed out besides Tom Garrett and the Rowans?" The pastor hesitated, then retrieved another ledger, this one a personal journal rather than official records. He flipped through pages, finding what he needed. The Hendersons lost their place 2 years ago. The Yates family. Samuel Brooks. He was a good friend of Daniel's, fought to keep his ranch for 8 months before Sloan foreclosed on debts that shouldn't have existed. Brooks moved his family to Denver last spring. He continued listing names, and with each one, Wade's understanding of Sloan's operation grew clearer. This wasn't opportunistic greed, it was systematic, methodical, a long-term campaign to consolidate control through legal pressure, forged documents, and strategic violence when necessary. Why hasn't anyone gone to the federal marshals? Wade asked. Some tried. Sam Brooks rode to Denver to file complaints. Nothing happened. Either Sloan's influence reaches that far, or the marshals don't care about land disputes in forgotten valleys. Pastor Williams closed his journal. People learned to stop asking for help that wasn't coming. Wade thanked him and rode to the sheriff's office, not expecting help, but wanting to see what kind of man Ashwood called law enforcement. Sheriff Dalton sat behind a desk that had seen more coffee spills than arrests, reading a week-old newspaper with the concentration of someone trying to look busy. He was 50-something, going soft around the middle, with a badge that looked heavier than he wanted it to be. He glanced up as Wade entered. Help you? Wade Mercer. Just wanted to introduce myself. I'm staying out at the Rowan Ranch for a spell. Dalton's expression shifted fractionally. That's so. Had some men come by yesterday. Made some threats. Thought you should know? Mrs. Rowan's having business disputes with Victor Sloan. That's civil matter, not criminal. Dalton's tone was rehearsed, like he'd said these exact words before. I suggest she hire a lawyer if she's unhappy with Mr. Sloan's offers. Even if those offers are based on forged documents? The sheriff's face hardened. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Mercer. You got proof? Wade placed the certified funeral record on the desk. Daniel Rowan died March 14th, buried March 16th. Sloan's water rights documents are dated April 2nd. Unless dead men can sign papers, someone's committing fraud. Dalton barely glanced at the document. I'm not a handwriting expert. You want to challenge legal documents, you take it to a judge. Would that be the judge in Hollister who's on Sloan's payroll? Careful, son. Dalton stood slowly, hand resting near his gun belt. You're new here, so I'll give you some free advice. Victor Sloan is an important man in this valley. He's brought investment, jobs, stability. If he says Mrs. Rowan's husband signed those papers, then I expect that's what happened. And if I've got proof otherwise, then you're looking for trouble you won't win. The sheriff's voice dropped lower, almost sympathetic. I've seen men like you before. You ride in thinking you'll fix everything, play hero for a widow and her kid. But this valley is more complicated than you understand. Sloan's not some outlaw you can outdraw. He's the future here. And people who stand in the way of the future tend to get run over. Wade held the man's gaze until Dalton looked away first, a small victory that meant nothing. Thanks for your time, Sheriff. Mr. Mercer, Dalton called as Wade reached the door. That horse of yours. Might want to keep him close. Accidents happen to animals that wander. Wade left without responding, though his hand stayed near his revolver until he was back on Ranger and riding south out of town. The threat was clear enough. Sloan knew Wade was involved now, and the rules of engagement had just been established. The ride to Hollister took the rest of the day. Wade pushed Ranger harder than he liked, but time had become a factor he couldn't ignore. Those riders would return to Eliza's ranch soon, possibly tonight, certainly within days. He needed ammunition for the fight before it started. Hollister was bigger than Ashwood, a proper county seat with a courthouse, multiple saloons, and the kind of commercial activity that came with being on a stage route. The Land Records Office sat in a stone building that tried to look important and almost succeeded. Wade arrived just before closing, which meant the clerk, a thin man with ink-stained fingers and the harried expression of someone perpetually behind on work, was less than thrilled to see him. Need to request property records for Ashwood Valley, Wade said. Specifically, water rights transfers over the past 3 years. The clerk sighed like Wade had asked him to move mountains. Do you know how many property transactions happen in 3 years? That could be hundreds of documents. Then I'll help you look. I'm specifically interested in transfers involving Victor Sloan or any of his proxy companies. Something flickered in the clerk's expression. Recognition, maybe, or wariness. What's your business with these records? Personal interest. Mr. Sloan's holdings are extensive. You'll be here for days. Then I better get started. The clerk studied Wade for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. Records room's in the back. You can review documents, but you can't remove anything from the building. Copies cost 5 cents per page. He paused. And I close in an hour, so you'll have to come back tomorrow. Wade spent that hour pulling every document he could find related to Ashwood Valley water rights. What he discovered confirmed Margaret Chen's account and made it worse. Sloan hadn't just taken 11 ranches. He'd systematically targeted every independent water source in the Eastern Valley. The pattern was consistent. First came financial pressure, loans called in, property taxes suddenly reassessed, construction permits denied for mysterious reasons. Then came the legal mechanisms, liens, foreclosures, court-ordered sales. Finally came the transfers, always documented, always appearing legitimate. But when Wade looked closely at the dates and signatures, irregularities appeared. Transfers signed by people who died weeks earlier. Documents notarized on dates when the notary was recorded elsewhere. Witnesses who, according to other courthouse records, had left the county months before they supposedly witnessed these transactions. It was brilliant in its audacity, a fraud so comprehensive, so officially documented, that challenging it would require dismantling an entire infrastructure of corruption. Wade copied what he could afford, marking the most damning documents. When the clerk announced closing time, Wade had spent nearly $2 on copies and barely scratched the surface of Sloan's operation. "You'll be back tomorrow?" the clerk asked, sounding genuinely curious rather than hostile. "First thing, there's a boarding house 2 blocks west. Mrs. Patterson runs it. Clean rooms, decent food. Tell her Eugene sent you. She'll give you the weekly rate even if you're only staying a few days." Wade studied the clerk. Eugene, apparently, and saw something he recognized. The look of someone who wanted to help but couldn't afford the risk of being obvious about it. "You know what Sloan's doing here?" "I'm a clerk, Mr. Mercer. I record what people tell me to record. What I know or don't know doesn't change what's written in the books." But Eugene's eyes said something different. "Although I will mention that fire regulations require me to carefully maintain backup copies of all documents in a separate location. If something were to happen to certain records, those backups would become the official documentation." "That's good policy." "I think so." Eugene locked the records room door. "Mrs. Patterson serves supper at 6. You should go." Wade found the boarding house and a room that was exactly as advertised, clean, plain, functional. He ate supper with other guests who minded their own business, then spent the evening reviewing his copied documents by lamplight, building a map of Sloan's empire on paper that wouldn't mean anything until he could prove it in a court that wasn't corrupt. Sleep came poorly, interrupted by thoughts of Eliza and Nora alone at the ranch, of riders who might return while Wade was 20 miles away chasing paper trails. But turning back now would accomplish nothing. He needed proof before he could fight. Dawn found him back at the records office. Eugene opened early, saying nothing, simply unlocking the records room and returning to his desk while Wade continued pulling files. By noon, Wade had documented 17 separate property transfers in Ashwood Valley, all involving suspicious circumstances. By evening, he'd found 5 more, plus references to ongoing disputes and pending foreclosures. The scope of Sloan's operation was staggering. This wasn't just land grabbing, it was the systematic dismantling of an entire community's independence. "Find what you needed?" Eugene asked as Wade prepared to leave on the second day. "Found enough to know this goes higher than local corruption. Federal prosecutors would be interested in this." "Would they?" Eugene's tone was neutral, but his eyes sharpened slightly. "And do you have connections to federal prosecutors, Mr. Mercer?" "Not yet. But I know someone who might." It was half true. Wade had spent a few months working security for a cattle company whose owner had connections in Denver's legal community. It had been 5 years ago, and those connections were thin, but it was more than nothing. He left Hollister at dusk, pushing Ranger to make miles while light remained. The horse was tired, but game, understanding urgency the way animals sometimes do. They made it halfway back to Ashwood before full darkness forced them to stop. Wade made cold camp in a stand of cottonwoods near a creek, unsaddling Ranger and letting the horse water while Wade chewed jerky and planned next moves. Tomorrow he'd return to Eliza's ranch with documented proof that Sloan's empire was built on fraud. Then he'd need to figure out how to use that information before Sloan's men returned with something worse than threats. He was checking Ranger's hooves by moonlight when he heard horses approaching. Wade's hand went to his Colt, body tensing as he calculated distances and cover. 2 riders, maybe 3, moving at an easy pace. They hadn't spotted him yet, or if they had, they weren't acting hostile. The riders came into view, and Wade recognized one of them immediately. The quiet one from Eliza's ranch, the man who'd spoken last and warned that Sloan would keep sending men until someone stopped him at the source. Wade stepped out of the shadows, gun drawn but not aimed. "Evening." Both riders reined in hard, hands dropping toward weapons before they saw who'd spoken. The quiet one's eyes narrowed. The drifter from Rowan Ranch. Wade Mercer. I know who you are. Whole Valley knows by now. The man dismounted slowly, hands visible. His companion, younger, nervous, stayed in the saddle. Got a minute to talk? Depends what we're talking about. Your health, mostly. The quiet one moved to a fallen log and sat, making himself non-threatening through posture. My name's Cole Hastings. I work for Victor Sloan, which you already knew. What you might not know is that some of us are having second thoughts about the work we've been doing. Wade didn't lower his gun. Why tell me? Because you're asking questions in Hollister. Because you've got proof of something that makes you dangerous to Sloan. And because 3 more riders left Ashwood this afternoon, heading for the Rowan place, and they weren't bringing contracts. Hastings met Wade's eyes directly. They were bringing accelerants and orders to make the ranch uninhabitable. Sloan's done negotiating. Wade felt ice water flood his veins. When? They were supposed to wait until after midnight. Wanted to make sure you weren't there. Figured you'd be easier to handle separately. Hastings gestured toward his nervous companion. This is Ben Porter. He was supposed to ride with them. He came to me instead. Ben spoke up, voice tight. I signed up to intimidate people, not burn families out of their homes. There's a kid living there. I've got daughters. I can't... He stopped, swallowing hard. I won't do that. Wade holstered his gun and moved to Ranger, saddling up fast. How many men? 3, maybe 4. Depends if Sloan sent backup from his ranch. Hastings stood as well. You won't make it back in time if you leave now. It's 40 miles. You'll kill your horse trying, and you'll still arrive too late. Then what do you suggest? I suggest you ride straight to Sloan's place instead. It's 15 miles northeast. He's got a ranch outside Ashwood. Big spread, nice house, all built on money he stole from better people. Hastings' voice hardened. You want to stop this war? You end it at the source. Take the fight to him directly. While Eliza's ranch burns, while I ride to warn Mrs. Rowan and get her and the kids somewhere safe, Hastings walked to his horse. I've still got some authority with Sloan's men. I can buy time, maybe talk them out of it entirely. But only if you're dealing with Sloan directly, making him too busy to worry about one widow's ranch. Wade wanted to refuse, to ride straight back and face whatever was coming. But Hastings was right. The math didn't work. He'd arrived too late, exhausted, with a dead horse and no backup. Better to trust a man who just committed treason against his employer to protect a woman and child he'd been ordered to threaten. How do I know you're not setting me up? Wade asked. You don't, but Ben and I are riding to Rowan Ranch right now, and if we wanted you dead, we'd have shot you 2 minutes ago when you stepped into the moonlight like an idiot. Hastings swung into his saddle. Sloan's place has guards. Main house sits on a hill. You'll see it once you clear Miller's Creek. If he's home, you'll know because all the lamps stay lit. Man's afraid of the dark, which is funny considering how much darkness he's caused. Why are you doing this? Hastings gathered his reins, looking older suddenly in the dim light. Because Tom Garrett was my friend, and Sloan had him killed over a piece of land that wasn't worth a man's life. Because I've been taking his money and pretending I didn't see the monster I was working for. And because sooner or later, every man has to decide who he is. Tonight, I'm deciding. He looked at Ben. Let's ride. They galloped south toward Eliza's ranch, and Wade turned Ranger northeast toward a confrontation he hadn't planned for but couldn't avoid. If this was a trap, he was riding straight into it. If it wasn't, he was about to declare war on a man who owned half a valley and wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who threatened his empire. Ranger sensed the urgency and found speed Wade didn't know the horse still had. They covered ground fast, following creek beds and wagon roads through country that looked peaceful in moonlight and hid violence underneath. Sloan's ranch appeared exactly as Hastings described, a main house blazing with light on a hill overlooking cleared land and outbuildings arranged like a small fortress. Fence lines ran straight and perfect. Barns looked new. Everything spoke of money and control. 4 horses stood tied near the main house. Guards, probably, or men waiting for orders. Wade dismounted a quarter-mile out, tied Ranger in a cottonwood grove, and approached on foot, using darkness and terrain to stay invisible. The house had a wide porch and large windows that showed the interior clearly. Wade counted 6 men inside, 5 standing around a central figure who sat in a leather chair like a king holding court. Victor Sloan, Wade assumed, mid-40s, well-dressed, The kind of man who'd look respectable in any courthouse or church while ruining lives behind closed doors. Wade circled the property, noting guard positions and escape routes. This was suicide if he was wrong about Hastings. This was barely better than suicide if he was right. But Eliza and Nora were 40 miles away, possibly watching their ranch burn, and Wade had made a promise to stand between them and the men who wanted to destroy them. Time to find out if his word was worth anything. He stepped onto the porch and knocked on the front door like he'd been invited. The conversation inside stopped mid-sentence. Wade heard bootsteps crossing hardwood. Then the door swung open to reveal a man in his 30s wearing a gun belt and the kind of confidence that came from never being told no. His hand was already on his revolver when he saw Wade standing there alone, unarmed in appearance, backlit by moonlight. "Help you?" The guard's voice carried the particular hostility of someone interrupting his evening. "Here to see Victor Sloan. Tell him Wade Mercer's got information about property records in Hollister that he'll want to hear about before federal marshals do." The guard's expression shifted. Surprise, calculation, then something closer to concern. "Wait here." He closed the door without slamming it, which told Wade the threat had landed correctly. Inside, voices rose in discussion Wade couldn't quite make out through the walls. A minute passed. 2. Wade kept his hands visible and his breathing steady, aware that multiple rifles were probably aimed at him from darkened windows. The door opened again. Different man this time, older, with the bearing of someone used to giving orders. "You're either very brave or very stupid, Mr. Mercer. Walk inside slowly, hands where we can see them." Wade entered a room that probably cost more than most Ashwood ranches. Polished furniture, oil paintings, a chandelier that belonged in a Denver hotel. The 5 men he'd counted through the window had spread out strategically, creating overlapping fields of fire. Professional positioning. These weren't ranch hands playing at security. Victor Sloan remained seated in his leather chair, studying Wade with the detached interest of someone examining an unexpected insect. He was younger than Wade had imagined, maybe 42 or 43, with dark hair graying at the temples and eyes that calculated worth in every glance. Well-tailored suit, manicured hands, the kind of polish that came from Eastern money and Western ambition. "Wade Mercer," Sloan's voice was educated, almost gentle. "You've made quite an impression in a very short time. Cole Hastings mentioned you, said you were the drifter playing protector for poor Eliza Rowan. Cole Hastings is writing to warn Eliza about the men you sent to burn her ranch." Sloan's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Is that what you think is happening?" "That's what I know is happening. Question is whether you want to call them off before this gets federal." "Federal." Sloan smiled, thin and precise. "You walked into my home, surrounded by my men, and you're threatening me with federal intervention. I admire the audacity, even if I question the intelligence." Wade pulled the folded documents from inside his jacket, slow, careful, watching the guards tense. He dropped the papers on the table beside Sloan's chair. 17 property transfers in Ashwood Valley, all involving signatures from people who were dead when they supposedly signed. Dates that don't match funeral records. Witnesses who weren't in the county. Notary seals used on days when the notaries were recorded elsewhere. He paused, meeting Sloan's eyes. "That's not business. That's fraud. Federal fraud. The kind that brings investigators who don't care about your brother-in-law, the mayor, or your pet sheriff." Sloan picked up the documents, reviewing them with the calm focus of someone reading a restaurant menu. When he finished, he set them down gently. "Impressive research. Must have cost you considerable time in Hollister. Eugene Watts is a thorough clerk, perhaps too thorough for his own good." Wade caught the threat implicit in mentioning Eugene by name, but kept his expression neutral. "Here's what I think happened," Sloan continued, standing now, moving to a sideboard where crystal decanters caught lamplight. He poured whiskey without offering Wade any. "You're a drifter with delusions of heroism. You saw a widow in distress and convinced yourself you could save her. So you rode to Hollister, copied some documents you don't fully understand, and now you're here making threats you can't back up." He sipped his whiskey. "Federal marshals don't care about land disputes in forgotten valleys, Mr. Mercer. They care about train robberies and territorial violence. Even if you somehow convinced them to investigate, it would take months, maybe years. By then, Mrs. Rowan will have accepted reality, and you'll be long gone. Or dead. That threat? That's prediction based on experience. Sloan returned to his chair, settling into it like a man completely comfortable with his power. I've built something substantial in Ashwood Valley. When I arrived, this place was dying, scattered ranches barely surviving, no infrastructure, no vision. I brought investment, organization, efficiency. Yes, some people lost property. That's unfortunate but necessary. Progress requires consolidation. Progress built on forged signatures and dead men's names. Sloan's smile faded. You're tedious, Mr. Mercer. I hoped you'd be smarter than this. He gestured to the guards. Take him to the barn. Make sure he understands the cost of interfering in my business. Then put him on his horse and send him north. If he's seen in Ashwood Valley again, kill him. The guards moved forward, and Wade's hand dropped to his Colt, except it wasn't there. He'd removed his gun belt before approaching the house, hidden it with Ranger, betting that appearing unarmed would get him inside without immediate violence. That bet was now looking catastrophically stupid. The nearest guard grabbed Wade's shoulder, and Wade drove his elbow backward into the man's ribs, felt something crack, followed through with a punch that connected with another guard's jaw. For about 3 seconds, Wade actually thought he might fight his way out through sheer momentum and luck. Then someone hit him from behind with something heavy, and the floor came up fast to meet his face. Wade woke to the smell of hay and horses and his own blood. His head felt like someone had used it for hammer practice, and his hands were bound behind his back with rope that cut into his wrists. He was lying on his side in what appeared to be a tack room, saddles hanging on the walls, moonlight coming through gaps in the boards. 2 guards stood nearby, one nursing bruised ribs, the other smoking a cigarette with studied casualness. Neither looked happy about their assignment. He's awake, the smoker announced. The door opened and Victor Sloan entered, still wearing his expensive suit, completely unruffled despite the violence that had erupted in his parlor 15 minutes earlier. He carried Wade's documents in one hand and a kerosene lamp in the other. Mr. Mercer, still with us. Good. Sloan set the lamp on a workbench, illuminating the small space with flickering orange light. We need to have an honest conversation, you and I. One where you understand exactly how this ends. Wade worked his jaw, tasting copper. You planning to monologue like some theater villain, or are we getting to the part where you try to kill me? Neither, actually. Sloan pulled up a stool and sat, bringing himself eye level with Wade on the floor. I'm going to explain reality to you, and you're going to listen because your life, and more importantly, Eliza Rowan's life, depends on you understanding what I'm saying. He held up the copied documents. These are worthless. Interesting, certainly. Suggestive even, but legally worthless. You have no standing to challenge property transfers you weren't party to. You have no proof beyond circumstantial timing. And even if you somehow convinced a judge to investigate, I have lawyers who will bury you in depositions and continuances until you run out of money and patience. Federal prosecutors don't run out of money. Federal prosecutors don't waste time on civil land disputes. Sloan's voice remained calm, almost professorial. What you're describing might, in a perfect world, rise to the level of federal interest. But we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world where territorial courts handle local matters, and territorial courts are staffed by men I've known for years. Men who understand that economic development sometimes requires bending procedural rules. Wade said nothing, calculating distances and odds. The guards were alert but not paranoid. The door was 8 feet away. His hands were bound, but his legs weren't. If he could get to his feet— Don't, Sloan said quietly, reading Wade's thoughts. You won't make it to the door. And even if you did, where would you go? Your horse is being held at the north fence. My men control every road out of here. You came alone to confront an enemy you don't understand, and now you're going to pay for that arrogance. So kill me already. I don't want to kill you, Mr. Mercer. I want to employ you. Sloan smiled at Wade's expression. You're capable, resourceful, clearly skilled with violence. Men like you are useful if they can be redirected. I'll pay you $500, right now, tonight, to ride north and never come back. Mrs. Rowan will sign her papers within a week, the valley will continue its development, and you'll be wealthy enough to start fresh wherever you choose. Wade laughed, tasted blood again, kept laughing anyway. You actually think I'd work for you? I think you're a survivor who's smart enough to recognize losing positions. Sloan stood, brushing hay from his trousers. But if you're determined to play martyr, then let me clarify what martyrdom costs. If you refuse my offer, you die tonight. Not here, but somewhere your body will be found with a plausible story attached. Drifter who tried to rob the wrong ranch, perhaps. Tragedy, but these things happen. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Mrs. Rowan's ranch will burn tomorrow night instead of tonight. Not because I'm cruel, but because I'm practical. She'll have time to get out with her daughter. They'll be alive, but homeless, which will make signing my papers much easier. She'll lose everything, but she'll have her life. That's mercy, Mr. Mercer. More than you've earned. Cole Hastings is warning her right now, Wade said. Your men won't get near that ranch. Cole Hastings is a coward who'll do what he's told when morning comes, and he remembers who signs his pay vouchers. Sloan opened the door, letting in cold night air. You have until I finish my whiskey to decide. Die pointlessly or take the money and live. Most men choose life. He left, and the guards remained, watching Wade with the tired patience of men who'd done this before and would do it again. The smoker lit another cigarette. The other one checked his revolver, making sure Wade saw the gesture. Wade closed his eyes and thought about Eliza standing on her porch with a rifle across her lap, about Nora in oversized boots asking if he was scared, about a valley full of people who'd learned to accept injustice because fighting it cost too much. He thought about all the times he'd ridden away from other people's problems, telling himself it was wisdom when it was really just cowardice dressed up in practical clothes. Then he thought about the knife he'd tucked into his boot before approaching Sloan's ranch. Small blade, easy to miss in a quick search, just barely within reach if he could get his legs positioned correctly. The guards were talking quietly near the door, not watching close enough. Probably figured a man tied up and beaten wasn't much threat. They were mostly right, except for the small details that made all the difference. Wade rolled onto his back, drew his knees up like he was trying to get comfortable, and used the motion to hook his boot heel against the workbench leg. The knife was there, exactly where it should be, held in place by leather and luck. He worked his boot off with agonizing slowness, felt the knife shift loose, caught it between his bound hands. The rope parted after what felt like hours, but was probably 90 seconds. Wade kept his hands behind his back, breathing steady, waiting for the right moment that might not come. The door opened again. Not Sloan this time, one of the other guards, carrying a canteen. Boss says give him water, wants him conscious for the ride out. The smoker took the canteen, approached Wade without particular caution. You thirsty, Drifter? Wade exploded upward, driving his shoulder into the guard's midsection, following through with the knife aimed at the man's gun hand. The blade caught flesh and the revolver dropped, and suddenly Wade had a weapon and the guard was stumbling backward, screaming. The other guard by the door went for his gun, but Wade was faster, fired once, missed, fired again, and didn't. The man went down hard. The wounded guard was still screaming. Wade hit him with the revolver butt, not gentle, and the screaming stopped. Then he was moving, out the door, into moonlight, running for the north fence where Sloan's men supposedly held Ranger. Shouts erupted behind him. A rifle shot cracked past too close. Wade fired back blindly, not trying to hit anything, just buying seconds. The north fence appeared ahead, and there was Ranger, still saddled, tied to a post along with 3 other horses. Wade cut Ranger loose, swung into the saddle without bothering to check if his gun belt was still attached. It was. Someone had hooked it over the saddle horn, probably planning to return it after Wade's body was dumped somewhere convincing. He spurred Ranger hard, and the horse responded like he'd been waiting for this exact moment, lunging into a gallop that carried them away from Sloan's ranch and into darkness. More rifle shots, wild and furious. Something tugged at Wade's sleeve but didn't find flesh. Then they were in trees, following a creek bed by moonlight, and the shooting faded behind them. Wade rode hard for 20 minutes before allowing Ranger to slow. His head throbbed where he'd been hit, his wrists bled from the rope, and his entire plan had collapsed into disaster and desperate improvisation. But he was alive, armed, and heading back toward Eliza's ranch where Hastings had supposedly gone to warn her about the riders Sloan sent. If Hastings had been telling the truth, if he'd gotten there in time, if Sloan hadn't sent backup after Hastings himself. Too many ifs. Not enough certainty. Wade urged Ranger back to a gallop despite the horse's exhaustion, pushing toward Rowan Ranch through country that felt increasingly hostile with every mile. Dawn was breaking by the time Wade crossed into familiar territory, and he smelled smoke before he saw the ranch. His stomach dropped. He kicked Ranger into a final sprint, crested the last hill, and saw The ranch standing intact. No flames, no destruction. Just smoke rising from the chimney where Eliza was presumably making breakfast like this was any normal morning. 3 horses stood in the corral, Eliza's mare, and 2 others Wade recognized from the night before. Hastings and Ben Porter, if they'd kept their word. Wade dismounted badly, stumbling on legs that didn't want to hold him. He made it to the porch and knocked, realized how insane he must look. Blood on his face, rope burns on his wrists, clothes torn from fighting his way out of Sloan's barn. Eliza opened the door with the Henry rifle already raised, then lowered it when she saw who it was. Sweet mercy. What happened to you? Long story. You and Nora all right? We're fine. Mr. Hastings arrived around midnight, said there was trouble coming. We've been ready. She stepped aside, letting Wade enter. You look like you lost a fight with a mountain. Cole Hastings sat at the kitchen table nursing coffee, his face showing the same exhaustion Wade felt. Ben Porter stood by the window, keeping watch. Both men had weapons ready. Sloan tried to buy me off, Wade said, accepting the coffee Eliza poured. When that didn't work, he tried to kill me. I objected. Hastings' expression was grim. Then it started. Once you made it out alive, Sloan can't let this go. He'll send everyone he's got. How many's everyone? 10, maybe 12 men who'll follow orders without asking questions, plus whoever he can deputize through Sheriff Dalton. Could be 20 guns by tomorrow. Wade drank his coffee, thinking. 20 armed men against himself, Hastings, Ben, and a widow with a rifle. The math was ugly. Nora appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, saw Wade's face, and went very still. Did the bad men hurt you? Some. I hurt them back worse. Good. She walked over and studied his injuries with clinical interest. Mama, he needs the medicine tin. Eliza retrieved supplies and set about cleaning Wade's wounds with efficient care that suggested she'd done this before. Probably for Daniel, probably for injuries that were explained away as ranch accidents. Wade sat still and let her work, feeling every one of his 32 years. What's the plan? Ben asked from the window. We can't hold this ranch against 20 men. We're not going to, Wade said. We're going to finish what I started in Hollister. Get those documents to someone who will actually use them. Hastings shook his head. There's no one in the territory who'll stand against Sloan. I told you, his influence reaches too far. Then we go outside the territory. Denver has federal prosecutors who handle fraud cases. I met one years ago, worked security for a cattle company he was investigating. Man named Harrison Birch, honest as they come, hated corruption more than he liked breathing. If I can get these documents to him. Denver's 200 miles north, Hastings interrupted. Sloan will have riders blocking every road by noon. You won't make it past Hollister. Then I don't take the roads. Eliza finished bandaging Wade's wrists and met his eyes. You're planning to cross the high country. It's faster if you know the trails, 3 days instead of 5 by road. It's also deadly this time of year. Early snow in the passes, thin air, and if you get turned around up there, you freeze to death before anyone finds you. I've crossed high country before. Not this high country. But Eliza's expression shifted, calculating something. Daniel used to guide hunters through the northern passes. He drew maps, kept them in his office. If those maps are accurate, they'll get me through. Hastings set down his coffee cup hard enough to make a point. You're talking about riding alone into mountains that kill experienced guides, carrying documents Sloan will murder you to prevent from reaching Denver. That's not a plan. That's suicide. You have a better idea? The room fell quiet. Outside, Ranger whickered and the chickens made morning sounds, completely indifferent to human plans falling apart. Finally, Eliza spoke, her voice steady despite everything. If Wade rides for Denver, what happens to Nora and me? It was the question nobody wanted to answer, but someone had to. Wade tried. Hastings and Ben stay here, help you hold the ranch until I can get federal marshals back. 3-4 days maybe. After that, Sloan burns us out or kills us all, Eliza finished. Let's not pretend this ends any other way if you leave. She was right. Wade knew it. Hastings knew it. Even Nora, watching from the doorway, probably understood it in the way children understand adult disasters before they're supposed to. Then we all go, Wade said. Pack what you can carry, take the horses, head into the high country together. Slower, but safer than splitting up. I can't take my daughter into those mountains. Eliza's voice cracked slightly. She's 7 years old, Wade. If something happens, if you stay here, something worse happens. Wade stood, moving to the window. The sun was fully up now, painting the valley gold, making everything look peaceful when it was anything but. Sloan tried to buy me, tried to kill me, and I ruined both those plans. He can't let me live now, and he can't let anyone who helped me live either. That means you, Nora, Hastings, Ben, probably Pastor Williams and Eugene Watts, and anyone else who gave me information. So we run, Hastings said quietly. Abandon the valley to Sloan and hope federal law catches up eventually. We don't run. We regroup. Get the evidence to Denver, bring back marshals with authority that supersedes Sloan's local corruption, and dismantle his empire piece by piece. Wade turned from the window. But first we survive the next few days. And survival means moving now, before Sloan's men arrive. Eliza looked at her daughter, at her ranch beyond the window, at the life she'd fought to preserve after her husband's death. Then she looked at Wade with eyes that had stopped hoping for easy answers. How long do we have? Hour, maybe 2. Sloan will send riders as soon as he organizes them. We need to be gone before they arrive. Then we better start packing. The next hour passed in controlled chaos. Eliza sorted through possessions with the brutal efficiency of someone who understood you could only take what fit on a horse. Clothes, food, Daniel's maps, a few photographs, Nora's doll. Everything else stayed behind. Furniture, livestock, the accumulation of a life built in this valley. Wade helped Hastings prepare the horses while Ben stood watch, rifle ready. Ranger looked exhausted but determined, the way good horses do when they understand something important is happening. Eliza's mare was older but steady. They requisitioned a third horse from the corral, young gelding, untested but their only option. Nora appeared beside Wade, still wearing those oversized boots, holding her doll. Are we coming back? Wade wanted to lie, to promise everything would be fine. Instead, he said, I don't know, but wherever we end up, you'll be safer than staying here. Papa's buried here, in the family plot behind the barn. Wade crouched down, meeting her eyes. I know, and he'd want you alive more than he'd want you staying near his grave. You understand that? Nora nodded slowly, then surprised Wade by hugging him, brief, fierce, desperate. Don't let the bad men hurt Mama. I won't. It was a promise Wade had no business making, a guarantee he couldn't deliver on with anything approaching certainty. But sometimes promises weren't about truth. They were about giving people the strength to keep moving when stopping meant dying. By the time Sloan's riders appeared on the horizon, the ranch was empty. Wade's group had been gone 30 minutes, heading northeast into rough country that would hide their tracks if they moved smart and stayed quiet. Behind them, Rowan Ranch stood silent in morning sun, doors open, chickens scattered, smoke still rising from the chimney where the fire hadn't been fully doused. From a ridge a mile away, Wade watched through field glasses as 6 riders approached the abandoned ranch. They dismounted, searched the buildings, realized their prey had escaped. One of them, the man with the poorly trimmed mustache from that first confrontation, fired his rifle into the air out of frustration. Beside Wade, Eliza sat on her mare, watching her home disappear behind them. Nora was with Hastings further up the trail, out of sight of the violence below. Ben kept watch on their back trail. They'll burn it, Eliza said quietly. Once they realize we're not coming back today, they'll burn everything. Probably. Daniel built that house. We were married in the front room. Nora was born in the bedroom upstairs. Her voice was flat, drained of emotion through sheer exhaustion. I was supposed to defend it. That was the whole point. You're defending your daughter. That's a better point. Eliza didn't respond, just kept watching until the ranch disappeared behind tree lines. Then she turned her horse and followed Hastings deeper into the high country, toward mountains that might kill them slower than Sloan's men would, but kill them just as dead if they made mistakes. Wade took one last look at the valley below, green and gold and beautiful, full of people who'd learned to accept the theft of their lives because fighting back cost too much. Then he turned Ranger north and left Ashwood Valley behind, carrying documents that represented the last chance to break an empire built on lies. The high country trails were steep and narrow, following creek beds and ridge lines through pine forest that smelled like resin and approaching autumn. Daniel's maps proved accurate, but they couldn't account for washouts, fallen trees, or the general difficulty of moving 5 people and 4 horses through terrain designed to break both. They made 12 miles the first day, stopping at a clearing where water ran clean and the trees provided cover from observation. Wade posted Ben on watch while Hastings built a small fire, risking smoke because the temperature was already dropping and Nora needed warmth. Eliza rationed supplies with practiced care: jerky, hardtack, coffee for the adults. Not enough for comfort, but enough to keep moving. They ate in silence, too exhausted for conversation, then bedded down in shifts while someone kept watch. Wade took second watch, sitting on a fallen log with his rifle across his knees, listening to night sounds and trying to calculate how badly their odds had deteriorated. Sloan would send trackers. The high country had limited routes this time of year. If they got caught in the open, "You're thinking too loud." Hastings appeared beside him, moving quiet despite his size. "I can hear it from my bedroll." "Occupational hazard." Hastings sat, pulling his coat tighter against the cold. "You know this is probably going to kill us." "Yeah." "And you did it anyway. Walked into Sloan's house like you could change his mind through force of personality." "Seemed like a good idea at the time." Hastings laughed quietly. "You're either the bravest man I've met or the dumbest. Haven't decided which." "Can it be both?" "Probably is." Hastings fell quiet for a moment, then said, "Tom Garrett was one of the best men I knew. Honest, hardworking, never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it. And Sloan had him killed over water rights worth maybe $5,000. Just murdered him like he was clearing brush." "Why'd you keep working for Sloan after that?" "Because I'm a coward." Hastings said it simply, without self-pity. "I told myself I was being practical, surviving, waiting for the right moment to act. But the truth is I was scared. Scared of Sloan, scared of losing my job, scared of ending up like Tom. So I took his money and looked the other way while he destroyed people's lives. But you're here now, because Ben Porter reminded me I've got daughters. 2 of them living in Hollister with their mother. And I looked at Nora in those oversized boots and realized my girls will grow up in a world where men like Sloan win if men like me keep choosing cowardice." He met Wade's eyes. "So no, I'm not brave. I'm just done being the thing I hate." Wade understood that. He'd spent years being the man who rode away, and it had slowly poisoned him from the inside until staying felt worse than fighting. They sat in companionable silence until watch ended. Then Hastings headed back to his bedroll and Wade remained, keeping vigil over 4 sleeping people who'd trusted him with their lives, despite having every reason not to. Morning brought frost and the realization that Nora's cough, barely noticeable the day before, had gotten worse overnight. Eliza tried to hide her concern, but Wade saw it in how she checked her daughter's forehead, in the extra blanket she wrapped around small shoulders. "She'll be all right once we get lower," Eliza said, not quite convincing anyone. "The thin air up here just takes adjustment." They pushed north anyway because stopping meant dying, following Daniel's maps through passes that grew narrower and steeper with each mile. By midday, they'd climbed above the tree line into country that was beautiful and hostile, where snow lingered in shadows, and the temperature dropped fast when clouds covered the sun. Nora rode with her mother, wrapped in blankets, coughing periodically. Each cough made Eliza's shoulders tighten fractionally. Ben Porter suddenly raised his hand, signaling stop. Everyone halted. "Riders behind us," Ben said quietly, "maybe 3 miles back following our trail." Wade grabbed field glasses and studied their back trail. 3 riders, moving fast, equipped for hunting people rather than animals. Sloan's men, almost certainly. "How'd they find us so quick?" Hastings demanded. "Because we're trailing 4 horses through mud and snow, and Sloan hired people who know how to track." Wade lowered the glasses. "How much daylight left?" 4 hours, maybe 5. "Then we don't stop until dark." They pushed the horses harder than was smart, sacrificing caution for speed, gaining distance, but exhausting mounts that were already struggling with altitude and terrain. The trail climbed steadily, following a ridgeline that dropped sharply on both sides, leaving no room for mistakes. Behind them, Sloan's riders kept pace, neither gaining nor losing ground. By the time darkness forced them to stop, Nora's cough had turned into something worse. Wet, deep, the kind of sound that preceded pneumonia or worse. Eliza built a fire despite the risk, heating water for tea that might ease her daughter's breathing. Wade and Hastings held a quiet conference away from the others. She's sick, Hastings said bluntly. Won't make it to Denver at this pace. We slow down. Sloan's men catch us tomorrow. We keep this pace, the girl dies. Take your pick of disasters. Wade looked at Nora, 7 years old, wrapped in every blanket they had, clutching her doll while her mother tried not to cry. He thought about promises made on porches, about the cost of being the kind of man who stayed instead of riding away. There's a mining camp marked on Daniel's maps, Wade said. Maybe 10 miles east. Probably abandoned this time of year, but there might be shelter. We get Nora warm and dry for a night, let her recover, then continue. That's 10 miles off our route, plus 10 back. We'd lose a full day. Then we lose a day. Wade met Hastings' eyes. I'm not watching that kid die because we push too hard. Sloan's men will gain on us. Then we deal with Sloan's men, but we do it with Nora alive. Hastings studied Wade for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, your call. But when those riders catch up, remember you're the one who chose this. They broke camp before dawn, turning east toward the mining camp, gambling everything on a 10-mile detour that might save one child's life or might get them all killed. Behind them, 3 riders continued north, following a trail that would lead nowhere while Wade's group diverted into terrain even rougher than what they'd already crossed. The mining camp appeared just after noon, a collection of collapsed buildings and abandoned equipment slowly being reclaimed by wilderness. But one structure remained mostly intact, a bunkhouse with a roof that didn't leak and walls that blocked wind. Inside smelled like rot and abandonment, but it was dry and defensible. Eliza got Nora settled near a fire while Wade and Hastings checked the perimeter. Ben found a decent vantage point where he could watch the approaches. We stay here tonight, Wade announced. Let Nora rest. Give the horses a break. Tomorrow we figure out next steps. Nobody argued, too exhausted to do anything but accept whatever leadership Wade offered. They spent the afternoon reinforcing the bunkhouse defenses, boarding up windows, creating firing positions, preparing for a fight that might not come, but probably would. By evening, Nora's breathing had eased slightly, and she managed to eat some food without immediately coughing it back up. Eliza finally allowed herself to sleep, collapsing into unconsciousness like someone who'd been holding themselves together through sheer will. Wade sat near the door, cleaning his revolver, calculating odds that kept getting worse. 3 riders behind them, possibly more ahead. Limited ammunition, a sick child. Mountains that wanted them dead almost as much as Sloan did. This was supposed to be simple, he said to no one in particular. Water my horse and keep riding. Hastings, standing watch at the window, laughed quietly. Nothing's simple once you decide to give a damn. That's why most people don't. You give a damn now? Apparently, still figuring out if that's wisdom or stupidity. Probably both. They stood their watches through the night, trading places every few hours, keeping fire burning and weapons ready. Just before dawn, Ben woke Wade with a whispered urgency. Company coming, 6 riders, heavily armed, moving toward the camp. Wade grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. In gray pre-dawn light, he counted 6 men on horseback, arranged in a formation that suggested military training or significant experience hunting people. They'd found the trail, followed it here, and now they were preparing to end this hunt permanently. Wade recognized the leader, the center rider from that first confrontation at Eliza's ranch, the one who tried to make threats sound like business. He was giving orders Wade couldn't hear, positioning men around the camp, cutting off escape routes. Beside Wade, Eliza had woken and grabbed the Henry rifle. Hastings checked his ammunition. Ben looked scared but steady. Wake Nora, Wade said quietly. Get her to the back room. Whatever happens out here, keep her safe. Eliza hesitated, torn between protecting her daughter and defending her group. Finally, she nodded and moved to wake Nora gently. Outside, the riders had finished positioning themselves. The leader called out, voice carrying clearly across cold morning air. Wade Mercer, I know you're in there. Mr. Sloan sent us to deliver a message. Come out, and we'll make this quick. Stay inside, and we burn the building with everyone in it. Wade looked at Hastings, at Ben, at the walls that wouldn't stop bullets for long. 6 against 3, with a woman and child to protect. The math was impossible. What do we do? Ben whispered. Wade checked his revolver one more time, thought about a widow standing on a porch with her spine straight and her hands clenched, about a 7-year-old in oversized boots asking if he was scared. We fight, Wade said. And we don't stop until they do. Wade moved to the window beside Hastings, keeping low, rifle barrel resting on the sill. Outside, the 6 riders had spread into a loose perimeter, professional positioning that gave them overlapping fields of fire while minimizing their exposure. These weren't ranch hands playing at violence. These were men who'd done this before. The leader dismounted slowly, hands visible, making a show of being reasonable. You've got 1 minute to decide, Mercer. Walk out and we'll make it painless. Stay inside and watch that woman and her kid burn. He's bluffing, Ben whispered. Sloan wants you dead, not witnesses to murder. Sloan wants the problem solved, Hastings corrected grimly. And we're the problem. He'll tell whatever story makes sense after we're dead. Wade calculated angles and distances, trying to find an advantage that didn't exist. The bunkhouse had 4 windows and 1 door, all potential entry points they couldn't adequately defend with 3 guns. The riders had rifles, revolvers, probably more ammunition than Wade's group could count. And morning light was improving by the minute, eliminating the darkness that might have provided cover. In the back room, Eliza was whispering urgently to Nora, probably explaining why they needed to stay quiet no matter what happened out here. Wade heard the fear in her voice despite her efforts to hide it. 30 seconds, the leader called. Then we start shooting through the walls. Won't take long to find targets in a building this small. Wade made a decision that was probably suicidal, but better than waiting to die. He stood, rifle still in hand, and called back through the window. I'm coming out. Let the others go and you can have me. Wade, Hastings started. Shut up. Wade kept his eyes on the riders. I'm the one Sloan wants. Rest of you are collateral damage. Maybe he'll be satisfied with just me. The leader outside conferred briefly with another rider, then called back. All right, come out slow. Hands where we can see them. Anyone else shows their face, we kill everyone. Wade handed his rifle to Hastings. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, take Eliza and Nora out the back window. There's a trail. There's no trail that doesn't lead to them hunting us down anyway, Hastings interrupted. You walk out that door, you're dead. We all know it. Then at least I'm dead buying you time to run. Or, Ben's voice was tight with fear, but his eyes were sharp, focused on something outside. Or we could use the fact that they're watching you and not watching their back trail. Wade followed Ben's gaze. Behind the riders, maybe 200 yards distant, movement in the tree line. Another rider approaching. No, 2 riders, moving carefully, using terrain for cover. Wade couldn't make out details in the dim light, but something about the way they moved suggested this wasn't reinforcements for Sloan's men. Who is that? Hastings squinted through the window. The answer came when one of Sloan's riders noticed the approaching figures and shouted a warning. The leader spun, reaching for his rifle, and the tree line erupted with gunfire. Deliberate, aimed shots that sent 2 of Sloan's men diving for cover while their horses scattered. Wade didn't waste the opportunity. He brought his rifle up and fired through the window, catching one of the remaining riders in the shoulder. Hastings and Ben opened up as well, and suddenly the advantage had shifted from siege to chaos. Sloan's men tried to regroup, but they were caught between 2 firing positions with nowhere to take cover except behind dead timber that wouldn't stop bullets. The leader went down first. Whether dead or wounded, Wade couldn't tell, and the others broke and ran for their horses. More shots from the tree line. One of the fleeing riders jerked and fell. Another made it to his horse, but the animal bolted before he could mount, leaving him running on foot toward inadequate cover. Wade stepped out of the bunkhouse, rifle ready, and put a shot past the running man's head. Stop or the next one finds you. The man stopped, hands rising slowly. The riders from the tree line emerged into full view now, and Wade recognized them despite the distance and poor light. Pastor Williams from the church, riding alongside Eugene Watts from the Hollister Records office, both armed, both looking slightly shocked at what they'd just done. Hastings moved to secure the surrendering rider while Wade approached the pastor and the clerk, trying to reconcile the image of these 2 men with the violence they'd just committed. Pastor, Wade's voice came out rougher than intended. Didn't expect to see you holding a rifle. Williams dismounted, face pale but determined. I was a cavalry scout before I found my calling. Some skills you don't forget, even when you wish you could. He gestured toward the downed riders. Are they 2 dead, 1 wounded, 3 ran off, Hastings reported, checking the bodies. Rest probably won't stop running until they reach Ashwood. Eugene dismounted as well, hands shaking slightly as he holstered his revolver. "We've been tracking you since you left the valley. Lost your trail twice, but the pastor knows these mountains." "Why?" Wade asked bluntly. "Why follow us?" "Because after you left my office, 3 men came asking what documents you'd copied." Eugene's voice was steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I told them nothing, but they didn't believe me. They destroyed half the records room looking for anything related to Sloan's holdings. Then they said I should consider my employment terminated and my safety no longer guaranteed." Pastor Williams picked up the explanation. "Eugene came to the church. We talked. Decided that if Sloan was sending men to destroy evidence and threaten clerks, maybe you were actually onto something worth protecting. So we gathered what supplies we could and rode out." "You're risking your lives," Wade said. "We're already at risk." The pastor's tone was matter-of-fact. "Sloan's men made that clear when they burned my church 2 nights ago. Said it was an accident with a lamp, but we both know what it was. A warning to anyone thinking about helping you." Wade felt something cold settle in his chest. "The church is gone? Just the building. The people remain." Williams looked toward the bunkhouse where Eliza had emerged with Nora, both staring at the carnage in the yard. "And sometimes protecting the people matters more than protecting the structure." Eliza held Nora close, shielding the girl's eyes from the bodies, though from the way Nora's face was buried in her mother's shoulder, she'd probably already seen too much. "Are they gone?" Eliza asked, voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Wade said. "But the 3 who ran will report back to Sloan. He'll know we killed his men. He'll send more." "Then we keep moving," Hastings said, already checking the captured horses. "Take their mounts, their supplies, whatever we can use. We gain maybe 6 hours before Sloan organizes another hunting party." They spent 20 minutes stripping the dead riders of weapons and ammunition, practical but grim work that nobody enjoyed. Wade found documents on the leader's body, orders written in precise handwriting that confirmed what they'd suspected. Sloan had authorized lethal force, bring back Wade Mercer's body, and proof the others were dealt with. Witnesses were to be eliminated. Eugene read the orders over Wade's shoulder and went pale. "That's murder. Premeditated, documented murder. That's one more charge for federal prosecutors," Wade said, folding the document carefully. "Along with the 17 counts of fraud, the forged signatures, the systematic theft of property." "Assuming we live long enough to deliver those charges," Ben muttered, loading supplies onto the captured horses. The addition of Pastor Williams and Eugene changed the group's dynamic. They now had 7 people, 6 horses, and enough weapons to actually defend themselves if cornered again. But they also had 7 mouths to feed, more tracks to hide, and the increased complexity of protecting people who'd never planned to become fugitives in the mountains. They rode north through terrain that grew increasingly hostile. Narrow passes, steep climbs, sections where the trail disappeared entirely, and they had to navigate by landmarks Daniel Rowan had marked on maps drawn before his death. Nora's cough persisted, but the rest at the mining camp had helped. She rode with Eliza, wrapped in blankets taken from Sloan's dead men, clutching her doll with the determined silence of children who understand something terrible is happening but don't know how to process it. By late afternoon, they'd covered another 15 miles and climbed above the permanent snow line. The temperature dropped steadily. Wind picked up, carrying the smell of weather moving in from the north. Wade studied the sky and didn't like what he saw. Clouds building, moving fast, the kind of system that brought serious snow to high country. "We need to find shelter," Pastor Williams said, reading the same signs. "That storm hits while we're exposed. We're finished." Daniel's map showed a ranger station another 8 miles northeast, but 8 miles in deteriorating weather with exhausted horses was optimistic. Wade calculated their odds and came up with numbers he didn't share with the others. "There's a cave system marked here," Eugene said, studying the map over Wade's shoulder. "Maybe 3 miles ahead. Natural shelter, multiple chambers according to the notation. Let's hope it's still there and not collapsed." They found the caves just as the first snow began falling, soft flakes that would turn serious within the hour. The entrance was narrow but opened into a larger chamber that could accommodate people and horses if everyone stayed cozy. Ben and Hastings cleared debris while Wade checked for animal occupants. The cave was empty except for old bear scat that looked months old. They brought the horses inside, unsaddled them, and built a small fire near the entrance where smoke could escape. Eliza prepared food while Pastor Williams tended to Nora's cough, with remedies he'd brought from his church supplies. Whiskey, honey, herbs that might help, or might just be comfort measures. Outside, the storm arrived with the particular fury that high country weather brings when it decides to remind humans they're not welcome. Snow fell heavy and fast, already accumulating inches. Wind howled through the cave entrance, making the fire dance and sputter. "We're stuck here until this passes," Hastings said, stating the obvious because someone had to. "Could be hours, could be days." Wade nodded, watching snow pile up outside. Somewhere behind them, Sloan was organizing more men, better supplied, probably with guides who knew these mountains better than Wade's group did. And somewhere ahead was Denver, federal prosecutors, the possibility of justice if they could survive long enough to deliver it. The group settled in for what would clearly be a long night. Eliza got Nora to sleep despite the coughing fits. Eugene and Pastor Williams discussed theology in quiet tones that suggested they were avoiding thinking about the bodies they'd left at the mining camp. Ben cleaned weapons obsessively, probably for the same reason. Hastings found Wade near the cave entrance, watching snowfall. "You know this is insane, right? We're trapped in a cave with a storm outside, an army behind us, and no guarantee anyone in Denver will care about our documents even if we make it there." "I know. And you're still planning to see this through." "Don't have much choice now. We killed Sloan's men. That makes this personal for him. He won't stop until we're all dead, or he is." Hastings was quiet for a moment, then said, "When I worked for Sloan, he told me once that the secret to building an empire was making people believe you were inevitable. Convince them they can't win, can't fight back, that resistance is pointless, and they surrender without you having to force them. He built his whole operation on that principle. What changed your mind about him? Watching him murder Tom Garrett and then toast to progress at a council meeting the same night. That's when I realized I was working for someone who didn't just lack morality. He'd actively chosen evil and convinced himself it was pragmatism." Hastings turned from the cave entrance. "You made me remember that some fights are worth losing if the alternative is living as the kind of man who wouldn't fight at all." Wade understood that. He'd spent years choosing the safe path, the smart path, the path that kept him alive and alone. Somewhere along the way, survival had stopped feeling like enough. The storm raged through the night and into the next day. They rationed supplies, kept the fire small, and waited with the particular patience of people who understood complaining wouldn't change anything. Nora's cough improved slightly in the warmth of the cave. Eliza taught her daughter card games with a worn deck someone had found in their supplies. The adults took turns on watch, more out of habit than necessity. Nobody was tracking anyone in this weather. By the second night, the storm had lessened but not stopped. Wade studied Daniel's maps by firelight, calculating routes and timing. Even if the weather cleared tomorrow, they'd lost 2 days. Sloan's men would have closed the gap, possibly gotten ahead of them to set up ambushes at logical route points. "We need a new plan," Wade said to the group. "The direct route to Denver is compromised. Sloan will have men watching the passes." "So we find another route," Pastor Williams said. "There isn't another route, not this time of year. Everything else is either blocked by snow or too dangerous to attempt with this many people." Eugene leaned forward, studying the map with the focused intensity he'd probably applied to land records. "What about here?" He pointed to a notation Daniel had made, a mining road that ran east toward the territorial border. "If we could reach this road, it connects to the freight route that runs north, longer but less predictable." "That road crosses Carson Pass," Hastings said. "It's a killer this time of year. Avalanche danger, narrow switchbacks, no shelter if weather turns." "But Sloan's men won't expect it," Wade countered. "They'll be watching the main routes. If we can make Carson Pass, we buy enough distance to reach the freight stations. From there, we could get a telegram to Denver, get federal marshals moving our direction. And if we can't make the pass?" Wade didn't answer because there was no good answer. They'd die in the mountains or die at Sloan's hands. At least the mountains didn't take it personally. "I vote we try," Eliza said quietly. Everyone looked at her. "Staying here accomplishes nothing. Going back means surrendering to Sloan. Forward is the only direction that gives us a chance." Nora looked up from her card game. "I don't want to surrender to the bad men." "Then we go forward," Wade said, making it official. "Soon as this storm breaks, we make for Carson Pass. Everyone needs to understand it's going to be dangerous. More dangerous than anything we've faced so far. If anyone wants to turn back..." "Nobody's turning back," Pastor Williams interrupted. We're already dead if we do. At least forward gives us a chance to mean something. The storm finally broke on the third morning, leaving behind a landscape transformed into white silence. Snow had piled 3 feet deep in places, making travel slow and treacherous. They broke camp at first light, loading exhausted horses and checking weapons that had sat unused for days. The route toward Carson Pass led through a valley that looked peaceful in morning sun, but hid dangers in every shadow. Avalanche-prone slopes rose on both sides. The trail, such as it was, followed a frozen creek bed where one wrong step could send a horse through ice into water cold enough to kill in minutes. They moved single file, Wade leading on Ranger, testing the ground before the others followed. Progress was measured in yards rather than miles. By noon, they'd covered maybe 5 miles and everyone was exhausted. That's when they found the first body. It was frozen, partially buried in snow, wearing clothes that identified him as one of Sloan's riders, probably from the group that had fled the mining camp. Wade dismounted and checked the corpse. No visible wounds. The man had simply frozen to death, probably got separated from his companions in the storm and couldn't find his way back. They were tracking us, Hastings said, reading the signs around the body. 3 riders at least, maybe more. Storm caught them, same as it caught us. Are they ahead or behind? Eliza asked. Both, probably. Some kept going, some turned back. The ones who kept going are either dead or desperate. They continued more carefully now, knowing they weren't alone in these mountains. The pass appeared ahead, a narrow cut between 2 peaks, steep and exposed, exactly as dangerous as Hastings had warned. The approach was a series of switchbacks carved into mountainside, barely wide enough for a horse and rider, with drops that disappeared into fog and snow. Wade studied the pass through field glasses, looking for movement, for any sign of ambush or danger beyond the natural kind. Nothing moved except wind-driven snow. We go one at a time, he decided. Space out so if someone falls, they don't take others with them. I'll lead, then Nora and Eliza together, then the rest of you spread out. I should go first, Hastings argued. I'm the expendable one. Nobody's expendable. Wade checked his saddle rigging one more time. But I'm the best rider here, and Ranger's the strongest horse. If something's going to go wrong, better it happens to someone who might survive it. He urged Ranger onto the narrow trail before anyone could argue further. The horse moved carefully, instinctively understanding the danger, placing each hoof with deliberate precision. The wind was worse on the exposed slope, strong enough to push against them, cold enough to freeze exposed skin in minutes. Halfway up the first switchback, Wade heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A deep crack, like thunder but wrong, coming from above. He looked up and saw the snow shelf breaking loose, thousands of tons of white death beginning to slide. Avalanche! Wade's shout was lost in the roar as the mountainside came down. He spurred Ranger forward, racing the wave, trying to reach the next switchback before the snow reached him. Behind him he heard screaming, Eliza's voice, Nora's, others. But he couldn't look back, couldn't do anything except ride. The snow hit like a physical force, swept Ranger's legs out from under them, and suddenly Wade was tumbling, falling, buried in white chaos that blocked out light and sound and breath. He felt himself sliding, rolling, hitting rocks that punched through his heavy coat. Then nothing, just cold and darkness, and the distant awareness that he was still moving, still falling, with no idea which way was up. The tumbling stopped. Wade lay buried, unable to move, lungs screaming for air he couldn't reach. He tried to dig upward, but didn't know which direction that was. Panic started to set in, the particular terror of being trapped alive in a grave of snow. Then hands, someone digging, pulling, dragging him free into painful brightness. Wade gasped, coughed, pulled in air that hurt going down. He blinked snow from his eyes and saw Ben Porter above him, face white with fear and exertion. Where's... Wade couldn't finish the sentence, too busy trying to breathe. Everyone made it except you and the horse, Ben said. You went over the edge. We thought you were dead. Wade struggled to sitting position, checking for broken bones and finding mostly just bruises and cuts. Ranger stood 20 feet away, also miraculously alive, shaking snow from his coat like this was just another inconvenience. The avalanche had swept them both off the trail and deposited them in a drift that had probably saved their lives by cushioning the impact. Above, on what remained of the trail, the rest of the group stared down at the destruction. The avalanche had wiped out 2 switchbacks completely, leaving behind only smooth white slope where the trail used to be. "Can you climb?" Hastings called down. Wade tested his legs, found they worked despite feeling like someone had beaten them with hammers. "Yeah, give me a minute." Getting back to the trail took 20 minutes of scrambling up loose snow and rock, with Ranger following gamely behind. By the time Wade reached the others, his hands were torn and bleeding, his coat was shredded, and he'd used up whatever luck he'd accumulated over 32 years of hard living. Eliza grabbed him in a brief, fierce hug that surprised them both. "Don't do that again." "Wasn't planning on it." Nora looked at him with wide eyes. "You fell really far." "I did." "But you didn't die." "Not yet." They surveyed the destruction. The avalanche had made the pass ahead even more dangerous. Snow piled deep in some places, bare rock exposed in others, stability questionable everywhere. But going back meant facing whatever forces Sloan had organized behind them. "We keep going," Wade said, because someone had to decide. Carefully, slowly, but forward. They made it over Carson Pass by early evening, moving at a pace that would have embarrassed a careful child, but kept everyone alive. The descent on the far side was marginally less suicidal, following a broader trail through pine forest where avalanche danger decreased, but exposure to cold increased as the sun disappeared behind mountain peaks. They made camp in a hollow that provided some wind protection, too exhausted for much conversation. Eugene tried to build a fire with wood too wet to catch easily. Pastor Williams led them in a brief prayer that Wade didn't participate in, but didn't object to either. If it helped people feel better, who was he to argue? Eliza tended to Wade's injuries, cuts on his hands, bruises across his ribs, a gash on his forehead he didn't remember getting. She worked in silence, her touches gentle but efficient. "Thank you," Wade said quietly. "For what?" "For not giving up. For trusting me when you had every reason not to. For being stronger than most men I've known." Eliza paused in her bandaging, meeting his eyes. "Daniel used to say that strength isn't about never being scared. It's about being scared and moving forward anyway. I'm terrified, Wade. Every minute of every day since we left the ranch. But I keep moving because stopping means Nora grows up in a world where men like Sloan win. We'll stop him." "You can't promise that." "No, but I can promise I won't quit trying." Eliza finished the bandage and moved back to Nora, leaving Wade with Eugene, who'd finally gotten the fire started and was warming his hands with the devotion of someone rediscovering circulation. "I've been thinking about what we're actually trying to accomplish," Eugene said quietly. "Even if we reach Denver, even if federal prosecutors care about our evidence, Sloan's operation is so entrenched, so thoroughly documented as legitimate, that dismantling it will take years. Court cases, appeals, endless legal battles. And during all that time, he'll still control the valley. You saying we should give up? I'm saying we need to think bigger." Eugene pulled out papers he'd been protecting throughout their journey, copies of Sloan's documents, his own notes from the records office. Sloan's empire isn't just built on fraud. It's built on a network of corrupt officials who validate his fraud. Sheriff Dalton, Mayor Harrison, Judge Cartwright and Hollister, county assessors who inflate property taxes, notaries who backdate documents. The whole system is contaminated. So we expose the whole system. Exactly. We don't just charge Sloan, we charge everyone complicit in his operation. Make it too big to ignore, too widespread to cover up. Force the territorial government to act because letting it stand would delegitimize their entire authority. Wade considered this, turning it over in his mind. "You're talking about taking down half the officials in 3 counties. I'm talking about taking down everyone who chose to profit from injustice. Make it expensive and public. Show people that corruption has consequences." "That's ambitious. That's necessary." Eugene's voice carried an intensity Wade hadn't heard before. "I'm a clerk. I've spent 20 years recording lies because I was too scared to challenge them. I'm done being scared. If I'm going to die in these mountains, I want it to mean something more than just protecting one widow's ranch." Hastings had been listening from his watch position near the fire's edge. "The kid's right. Half measures won't stop Sloan. We need to burn his entire operation to the ground, salt the earth, make sure it can't grow back." "That's a lot of enemies," Wade said. "We already have those enemies," Pastor Williams added. "They tried to kill us at the mining camp. They're hunting us now. Might as well make it count." Wade looked around at his unlikely group. A widow and her daughter, a reformed enforcer, a records clerk, a pastor who used to be a cavalry scout. a young man who'd discovered conscience at inconvenient timing. None of them were heroes. Most were barely keeping themselves together, but they'd chosen to fight anyway, and that had to count for something. "All right," Wade said. "We make it to Denver. We expose everything, every name, every fraudulent document, every official who looked the other way. We turn Sloan's empire into a federal case that can't be ignored or buried." "And if we don't make it to Denver," Ben asked, "then we die knowing we tried, which is better than dying knowing we ran." They settled in for the night, rotating watch shifts, keeping weapons close. Wade took last watch, sitting near the dying fire as dawn approached, thinking about promises he'd made and odds that kept getting worse. That's when he heard horses approaching from the east, multiple riders, moving carefully but not cautiously enough to avoid making noise. Wade woke the others silently, weapons ready, preparing for another fight they probably couldn't win. The riders came into view just as dawn broke. 4 men in territorial marshal uniforms, riding good horses, carrying themselves with the authority of people who didn't expect to be challenged. The lead marshal pulled up short when he saw Wade's group, hand dropping to his sidearm. "That's far enough. Identify yourselves." Wade stood slowly, hands visible. "Wade Mercer. These people are with me. We're heading to Denver with evidence of systematic fraud and corruption in Ashwood Valley." The marshal studied them, beat up, half frozen, armed but not aggressive. "You're the group Victor Sloan reported as dangerous fugitives wanted for murder and property destruction." "Sloan's lying. We have documented proof." "I'm sure you do." The marshal's tone suggested he'd heard this before. "Everyone's got proof when they're running from the law. You'll need to turn over your weapons and come with us back to Hollister. There'll be a hearing, everything proper and legal." "Hollister's courts are corrupt," Eugene spoke up. "The judge is Sloan's associate. We won't get a fair hearing." "That's not for you to decide." The marshal's hand stayed near his gun. "Now disarm, or we'll disarm you." Wade looked at the marshal, at his clean uniform, his well-fed horse, his absolute certainty that he represented justice. And Wade understood with sinking clarity that they'd come this far, survived this much, only to be arrested by legitimate law enforcement who couldn't see the corruption they were serving. "No," Wade said simply. The marshal's expression hardened. "That's not a request. And that's not a lawful order. You're arresting us based on the word of a man we have documented proof is committing federal crimes. Take us back to Hollister, and we're dead within a week, murdered by the same system you're supposed to be protecting us from." "That's paranoid speculation. That's survival." Wade's hand moved toward his Colt, not drawing, just resting there. "We're going to Denver. You can ride with us or ride away, but you're not taking us back." The 3 other marshals spread out slightly, creating firing positions. This was about to turn into a gunfight that would accomplish nothing except getting good people killed on both sides. Then Pastor Williams stepped forward, hands raised peacefully. "Marshal, I'm Pastor James Williams from Ashwood Valley. I've been a law-abiding citizen for 20 years. I'm asking you, not as a fugitive, but as a man who's seen too much injustice, to at least look at our evidence before you arrest us. If we're lying, you lose nothing by checking. If we're telling the truth, you save yourself from being complicit in corruption." The marshal hesitated, weighing something internal. Finally, he said, "You've got 5 minutes. Show me what you think is so important it's worth resisting lawful arrest." Eugene pulled out his documents, spreading them on a flat rock. Property transfers with impossible dates, signatures from dead men, notary seals used fraudulently. The marshal examined them with growing unease, his certainty starting to crack. "This is—" He stopped, started again. "These are serious allegations." "These are facts," Eugene corrected, "recorded in official county records. I'm the clerk who filed them. I can testify to their authenticity." The marshal looked at his men, then back at the documents. "Even if this is all true, I can't just ignore a warrant from a county judge. Judge Cartwright, who's listed here as witness to 3 property transfers that occurred on days he was documented in territorial court 200 miles away." Eugene pointed to the relevant pages. "He's part of it, Marshal. The whole system is contaminated." The marshal was quiet for a long time, reading through documents, his face growing grimmer with each page. When he finally looked up, something had changed in his expression. "I can't guarantee your safety in Hollister," he said slowly, "but I can escort you to Denver personally. Make sure you reach federal prosecutors without interference." He looked at his men. We'll call this protective custody rather than arrest. Technically still legal, and it keeps everyone alive." Wade felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying finally release. "You believe us?" "I believe these documents deserve investigation by authorities who aren't mentioned in them." The marshal began folding papers carefully. "And I believe Victor Sloan's been operating too comfortably for too long. Time someone looked closer at his empire." They rode east together, 4 marshals and 7 fugitives who weren't technically fugitives anymore, moving through country that was still dangerous but felt slightly less hostile, with legitimate law enforcement providing cover. The marshals shared supplies and offered medical attention to Nora, whose cough had worsened again in the cold. By evening, they'd reached a freight station where telegraph lines connected to the wider world. The marshal sent wires to Denver, to the territorial capital, requesting federal prosecutors and investigators meet them with authority to arrest territorial officials if evidence warranted. While they waited for responses, Wade stood outside watching the sun set behind mountains they'd barely survived crossing. Eliza found him there, Nora asleep against her shoulder. "We made it," she said quietly. "I didn't think we would, but we did. We're not done yet." "No, but we're closer than we were, and that's something." The telegraph clicked inside, receiving responses from Denver. The marshal emerged with paper in hand, expression unreadable. "Federal prosecutors want us in Denver within 3 days. They're assembling a team to investigate your allegations. You'll need to testify, provide documentation, probably spend weeks answering questions." "We'll do whatever it takes," Wade said. "There's more." The marshal's voice was grim. "Victor Sloan's filed charges against all of you in territorial court. Murder, arson, theft, conspiracy. He's pushing for immediate extradition back to Hollister before you can reach Denver." "Can he do that?" "Legally? It's complicated. Practically? He's got influential friends trying." The marshal folded the telegram. "Which means we need to move fast before those friends can mobilize enough authority to stop us." They rode through the night, pushing exhausted horses and even more exhausted people toward Denver and whatever justice waited there. Behind them, Wade knew, Sloan was mobilizing his empire's full weight: lawyers, officials, hired guns, anyone who could delay or stop the evidence from reaching federal authorities. It had become a race, and the prize was nothing less than the future of everyone who'd ever been crushed by power that thought itself untouchable. Denver appeared on the horizon at midday, a sprawling collection of brick buildings and wooden structures that represented civilization, law, and the possibility that justice might actually exist somewhere beyond Sloan's corrupted territory. Wade had been to the city twice before, years ago, and remembered it as loud, crowded, and indifferent to individual suffering. Today it looked like salvation. The federal courthouse sat on Larimer Street, a stone building that tried to project authority and mostly succeeded. The lead marshal, his name was Garrett, which carried unfortunate echoes of Tom Garrett, who'd been murdered for his ranch, sent runners ahead to announce their arrival. By the time Wade's group reached the courthouse steps, a crowd had gathered. Reporters, curious citizens, lawyers sensing opportunity. Harrison Birch emerged from the building as they dismounted. Older than Wade remembered, gray at the temples now, but still carrying himself with the rigid certainty of someone who believed law should mean something. His eyes found Wade's, and recognition flickered. "Wade Mercer. Didn't expect to see you again, especially not leading a group of fugitives into my courthouse." "They're not fugitives. They're witnesses." Wade's voice was rough from days of cold and exhaustion. "And we've got evidence of systematic fraud that's been operating in Ashwood Valley for 3 years. Birch's expression sharpened. "Then you better come inside before whoever you're accusing tries to stop you." The courthouse interior was warm, clean, organized, everything the mountain camps hadn't been. A clerk showed them to a large conference room where Birch had already assembled a team of federal prosecutors and investigators. Wade counted 6 lawyers, 2 territorial marshals he didn't recognize, and a stenographer ready to record everything. "Start from the beginning," Birch said, settling into a chair across from Wade. "And don't leave anything out." So Wade told it, the whole story from the moment he'd seen 3 riders threatening Eliza through every confrontation, every narrow escape, every piece of evidence they'd accumulated. Eugene supplemented with details from the records office. Pastor Williams provided witness statements about Daniel Rowan's funeral. Hastings described his time working for Sloan, the orders he'd received, the violence he'd witnessed. It took 4 hours. The stenographer's hand cramped twice. Coffee was brought in, then sandwiches nobody ate. Outside, the afternoon faded into evening, while inside they built a case against an empire. When Wade finally finished, Birch sat back and reviewed the documents spread across the table. 17 fraudulent property transfers, forged signatures, orders authorizing murder. Witness statements from half a dozen people who'd risked everything to be here. "This is substantial," Birch said quietly. "More than substantial. If even half of what you're alleging is accurate, we're looking at federal fraud charges, conspiracy, possibly murder. The scope is—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "The scope is unprecedented for territorial corruption cases." "Can you prosecute?" Wade asked. "Can I? Yes. Will it succeed?" "That's more complicated." Birch stood, pacing now, mind clearly working through legal strategies. "Sloan has resources. He'll hire the best defense lawyers money can buy. They'll challenge every document, every witness, every procedural detail. This could take years to fully adjudicate. Years during which he continues operating in Ashwood Valley," Eliza said, speaking for the first time since they'd entered the courthouse. "Years during which he ruins more families, steals more land, kills anyone who threatens him. I understand your frustration, Mrs. Rowan, but federal prosecution requires building cases that can't be dismantled on appeal. That takes time." "Then start with something faster," Eugene suggested. "The fraudulent documents create immediate legal complications for every property transfer Sloan's made in 3 years. File emergency injunctions freezing all his holdings until their legitimacy can be verified. That stops his operation immediately while you build the criminal case." Birch looked at Eugene with new respect. "You've been thinking about this." "I've had a lot of time to think in the mountains. Time and motivation." One of the other prosecutors, a younger man with ink-stained fingers, spoke up. "Emergency injunctions would require evidence that irreparable harm is ongoing or imminent. Do we have that?" "Sloan sent armed men to kill witnesses and destroy evidence," Hastings said flatly. "He burned a church. He's currently organizing forces to prevent us from testifying. That sound imminent enough?" The prosecutors exchanged glances. A whole conversation happening in small gestures and knowing looks. Finally, Birch nodded slowly. "We'll file for emergency injunctions tomorrow morning. Freeze all property transfers involving Sloan or his proxy companies pending investigation. That buys us time and disrupts his operation while we build the criminal case." "What about protective custody?" Marshal Garrett asked. "Sloan's got resources to reach people even in Denver. These witnesses need protection." "Federal marshals will provide security. We have safe houses." "No." Eliza's voice cut through the discussion. "I'm not hiding my daughter in safe houses while lawyers argue over paperwork. We came here to end this, not extend it." "Mrs. Rowan, I understand your feelings, but, you don't understand anything." Eliza stood, and there was something in her bearing that made everyone in the room pay attention. "I buried my husband 6 months ago. I've been threatened, driven from my home, hunted through mountains that nearly killed us. My daughter has pneumonia because we've been sleeping in caves to stay alive. And you're telling me the solution is hiding while this drags out for years?" Birch met her anger with unexpected gentleness. "I'm telling you that justice moves slowly by design. It's frustrating, but it's also what prevents people like Sloan from using the system to crush individuals. Due process protects everyone." "Due process didn't protect my husband. It didn't protect the 11 other families Sloan destroyed. And it won't protect us if we're dead before your case reaches trial." The room fell quiet. Nora, who'd been sleeping in the corner, woke and started coughing. Wet, deep sounds that made several prosecutors wince in sympathy. "Your daughter needs medical attention," Birch said quietly. "Let us arrange that at least, and temporary housing while we sort out the immediate legal complications." Eliza looked at Nora, at the cough that wouldn't stop, at the exhaustion written into every line of her daughter's small face. Finally, she nodded. "Medical attention first. Then we talk about next steps." A doctor was summoned from the territorial hospital. He examined Nora in an adjoining room while the adults continued planning. The diagnosis was concerning but not immediately critical: early pneumonia that needed warmth, rest, proper medicine. Things they hadn't been able to provide in the mountains. "She'll recover," the doctor said, preparing medications. "But she needs to stay warm and dry for at least 2 weeks. No travel, no exposure to cold. If this progresses to full pneumonia, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Housing was arranged at a boarding house 3 blocks from the courthouse. Rooms that were clean, warm, and under guard by federal marshals who understood the assignment was keeping witnesses alive until trial. Wade's group moved in with the particular relief of people rediscovering basic civilization after weeks of survival. That first night in an actual bed, Wade lay awake despite exhaustion, listening to the city sounds beyond the window. Somewhere out there, Sloan was receiving news that his empire was being challenged by federal authority. Somewhere, his lawyers were already crafting responses, filing motions, building defenses. The fight wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning. Morning brought news that spread through Denver newspapers faster than Wade expected. Federal prosecutors had filed emergency injunctions against Victor Sloan and 18 associated companies, freezing all property transfers pending fraud investigation. The territorial governor had ordered a review of county officials in 3 territories. The scandal was public now, impossible to contain or quietly resolve. Wade read the headlines over breakfast. Land baron faces federal charges. Systematic fraud alleged in Ashwood Valley. Widow's fight exposes corruption. Eliza's name appeared in several articles. So did Wade's, described variously as gunslinger, drifter, and unlikely hero. He hated all 3 descriptions equally. "You're famous," Ben said, reading over Wade's shoulder. "How's it feel?" "Feels like a target." Wade set down the newspaper. "Soon as Sloan sees these, he'll know exactly where we are. Federal marshals are outside. We're safe here. For now." But the day passed without incident. Then another. Nora's condition improved under proper medical care. The prosecutors worked 16-hour days building their case, taking depositions, tracking down additional witnesses. Eugene spent hours in Denver's records offices, finding patterns in Sloan's operation that extended beyond Ashwood Valley. The fraud was bigger than anyone had suspected. Dozens of properties across 4 territories, hundreds of documents with questionable authenticity. On the 3rd day, Hastings received word that his family, his ex-wife and 2 daughters, had been relocated to Denver under federal protection. Sloan's men had visited their home in Hollister, asking questions in the way men ask questions when the real message is threat. The marshals got them out just ahead of violence that might have been accidental, but probably wouldn't have been. "He's escalating," Hastings said, holding a letter from his oldest daughter. "Making it personal, going after families." "He's desperate," Birch corrected. "The injunctions froze his assets. His political allies are distancing themselves to avoid being swept up in investigation. His empire is collapsing faster than he can shore it up. Desperate men make mistakes." The mistake came on the 5th night. Wade was on the boarding house porch smoking a cigarette he'd bummed from one of the marshals when he noticed the man across the street. Too still, too focused, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit the neighborhood. Wade's hand drifted toward his Colt, and the man noticed, turned, walked away quickly. Wade followed. The man led him 3 blocks before ducking into an alley. Wade approached cautiously, expecting ambush, and found instead a young man, maybe 22, scared, holding a folded paper like it might explode. "Don't shoot," the man said quickly. "I'm not armed. I just need to deliver this." "Deliver what?" "Message from Mr. Sloan. He said to give it to Wade Mercer personally." The young man thrust the paper forward. "I'm just the messenger. I don't know what it says." Wade took the paper, opened it, read handwriting that was educated and precise. "Mr. Mercer, you've proven more persistent than anticipated. Congratulations on reaching Denver and convincing federal prosecutors to entertain your allegations. However, persistence without victory is simply prolonged failure. The injunctions are temporary inconveniences. My lawyers are already filing appeals that will restore my assets within weeks. Your witnesses are vulnerable despite federal protection. Your evidence is circumstantial, and you, personally, have made powerful enemies who will ensure you never ride comfortably through this territory again. I'm offering one final arrangement. Return to Ashwood Valley, testify that your allegations were mistaken, and I'll ensure Mrs. Rowan receives her ranch back with no further interference. Your criminal charges will be dropped. You can resume your drifting with $50,000 that will carry you comfortably anywhere you choose to go. Refuse, and I'll devote considerable resources to destroying everyone who testified against me." Mrs. Rowan will lose custody of her daughter to relatives who will ensure the child grows up learning the cost of her mother's stubbornness. Eugene Watts will face charges of document tampering and theft. Pastor Williams will discover his church's tax-exempt status was always conditional, and you will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, waiting for the day my patience finally ends. You have 48 hours to decide. Choose wisely. V.S. Wade read it twice, then handed it to the young messenger. Tell Mr. Sloan I'll give him an answer tomorrow, in person. The messenger's eyes widened. In person? Sir, I don't think... Tell him I'm coming to Ashwood Valley. Tell him if he wants a negotiation, we'll have it face-to-face. And tell him to have his lawyers ready, because I'm bringing federal marshals with authority to arrest him on sight. He won't agree to that. Then I guess there's no negotiation. Wade stepped back. Now leave before I remember you were part of delivering threats to witnesses under federal protection. The messenger ran. Wade returned to the boarding house where Birch was waiting with several marshals, having been alerted by the guards that Wade had left the perimeter. Where did you go? Birch demanded. Wade handed him Sloan's letter. Got a message, and I'm about to send one back. Birch read the letter, his expression darkening. This is witness intimidation. We can add charges. We can also end this faster than appeals and trials. Wade moved to the map on the wall, showing Ashwood Valley and surrounding territories. Sloan thinks he can outlast us in court. He's probably right. He's got money for lawyers, time for delays, connections for appeals. But if we bring him in for questioning now, put him in federal custody before his lawyers can build their defenses, we force his entire operation to collapse without him at the center. That's arrest without trial. We have evidence of witness intimidation, attempted bribery, threats against a child. That's enough for arrest pending investigation. Wade tapped the map. And we have something else. Sloan's letter confirms he's still in Ashwood Valley, still operating despite federal injunctions. He's violating court orders. That's contempt, and it's immediate grounds for arrest. One of the marshals, a woman named Chen, who'd been quiet until now, spoke up. He's got armed men protecting him. Riding into Ashwood to arrest Victor Sloan isn't legal procedure. It's a military operation. Then we bring military authority. Wade looked at Birch. You've got territorial militia connections. Request support for arresting a federal fugitive who's actively operating in violation of court orders. Birch was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing legal precedent against practical necessity. Finally, he said, if we do this, it has to be absolutely by the book. No revenge, no vigilante justice. We arrest Sloan and his key associates, we confiscate evidence, and we bring them back to Denver for proper trial. Can you do that? Wade thought about Tom Garrett, murdered for his ranch. About Daniel Rowan, probably killed the same way. About 11 families destroyed and a 7-year-old girl coughing in a boarding house because her home had been stolen. He thought about the part of him that wanted to put a bullet in Victor Sloan and call it justice served. Yeah, Wade said, I can do that. 2 days later, a force of 20 federal marshals and 10 territorial militia rode into Ashwood Valley at dawn. Wade rode at the front beside Marshal Garrett, carrying warrants for Victor Sloan's arrest, along with warrants for Sheriff Dalton, Mayor Harrison, and 6 other officials implicated in the fraud. The valley looked unchanged. Same hills, same creek, same ranches struggling to survive. But something felt different, like pressure before a storm. People watched from doorways as the federal force rode past, and Wade saw hope starting to replace resignation in their faces. Sloan's ranch appeared on the hill exactly as Wade remembered. Too perfect, too controlled, monument to power built on theft. But this time Wade wasn't approaching alone in darkness. This time he had the law at his back, real law with authority that superseded local corruption. The marshals surrounded the property while Garrett approached the main house with arrest warrants. Wade stayed mounted, rifle ready, watching for any sign of the armed resistance Chen had warned about. The front door opened and Victor Sloan emerged, not dressed for battle but for court, in a tailored suit with a lawyer at each elbow. He looked at the federal force, at Wade specifically, and smiled like this was all proceeding according to some plan Wade hadn't been told about. Marshal Garrett, Sloan said pleasantly. This seems excessive for a simple arrest. I assure you, I have no intention of resisting. Victor Sloan, you're under arrest for federal fraud, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and contempt of court. Garrett read from the warrant. You have the right to legal representation, which I've already retained, as you can see. Sloan gestured to his lawyers. I'll cooperate fully with your investigation. However, I should inform you that I've filed multiple motions challenging the emergency injunctions, along with formal complaints about prosecutorial overreach. This arrest will likely be ruled unlawful within days. That's for judges to decide, Garrett said. Right now you're coming to Denver. Of course. Sloan allowed himself to be handcuffed with the calm acceptance of someone who believed this was temporary inconvenience. As marshals led him to a horse, his eyes found Wade's. Impressive work, Mr. Mercer. You've disrupted several years of careful development. I hope the cost was worth it. Ask the families you destroyed if it was worth it. I built an empire. They lost ranches they were going to lose anyway to weather, debt, or simply exhaustion. I merely accelerated the inevitable while creating something larger. Sloan's smile didn't waver. History will remember me as a builder. You'll be a footnote about the drifter who thought he could stop progress. Wade didn't respond. There was nothing to say to a man who'd convinced himself that theft was development and murder was progress. Sheriff Dalton was arrested at his office, Mayor Harrison at his home. By noon, 8 officials were in federal custody, and Ashwood Valley was effectively without local government. The territorial governor appointed temporary administrators and promised proper elections once the corruption was fully documented. Wade rode to the Rowan Ranch with Eliza and Nora. The building still stood, though someone had broken windows and scattered belongings. The barn needed repairs. Fences were down. But the creek still ran clear and the land remained intact. Eliza stood in the yard where Wade had first seen her facing down 3 armed men, and something shifted in her expression, grief and relief mixing into something Wade didn't have words for. It's still here, she said quietly. It's still yours, Wade corrected. Federal injunctions are being modified to return all properties to original owners pending full investigation. You'll have the ranch back officially within days. Nora ran to the chicken coop, found 3 survivors who'd somehow avoided predators and starvation. Mama, the chickens are still here. Some things are harder to kill than others, Eliza said, and Wade heard layers of meaning in how she said it. They spent the afternoon cleaning, repairing, reclaiming. Other Valley families arrived. The Hendersons, the Yates, others who'd lost land to Sloan's operation and were now being told they might get it back. A community that had been systematically dismantled was slowly, tentatively beginning to rebuild. Pastor Williams rode out from town with news that donations had been collected to rebuild the church. Eugene Watts had been offered a position with the Territorial Records Office in Denver, supervising an audit of property transactions across 4 territories. Ben Porter was returning to his family, his conscience clear for the first time in years. Hastings found Wade near the creek at sunset, both men watching water flow the way it always had, indifferent to human complications. What happens next? Hastings asked. Trials, lots of trials. Sloan's lawyers will fight every charge. His associates will negotiate deals and turn witness against each other. The whole thing will take years to fully resolve. But it will resolve. The system will work this time. Maybe. Or maybe Sloan's right, and his appeals eventually win, and he gets most of his empire back. Wade shrugged. Either way, the Valley knows now. They understand what almost happened, how close they came to losing everything. That awareness is worth something. Is it enough? Has to be. It's all we've got. Hastings nodded slowly. I'm heading back to Hollister tomorrow. My daughters need me, and I need to figure out how to be the father they deserve instead of the coward I was. You weren't a coward in the end. No, but I was one for too long before that. There's a debt there I need to work off. They shook hands, and Hastings rode off toward whatever redemption looked like for a man who'd spent years enforcing injustice before finally choosing different. Wade stayed at the Rowan Ranch for another week, helping with repairs, testifying via written deposition to prosecutors in Denver, and trying to figure out what came next for a drifter who'd stopped drifting. On the morning he planned to leave, Nora found him in the barn checking Ranger's shoes. She'd grown in the past weeks, not physically, but in some internal way that happened to children who survived things that should have broken them. Are you leaving? She asked. Yeah, time to move on. Where will you go? Wade had been asking himself the same question. North to the territories he'd originally planned for? West to California? Somewhere no one knew his name or the story of how he'd helped dismantle an empire? Don't know yet, he admitted. You could stay here. Mama needs help with the ranch, and I need someone to teach me to ride properly. Ranger likes me. Wade smiled despite himself. Ranger likes everyone who feeds him apples. That's not true. He tried to bite Mr. Henderson last week. Nora moved closer, serious now in the way children get when they're trying to say something important. You told me being scared means being careful. Well, I'm still scared. Scared the bad men will come back. Scared Mama can't fix everything alone. Scared you'll leave and forget about us. I won't forget about you. But you're leaving anyway. Wade crouched down to her level, meeting those button-bright eyes that had seen too much. Here's something I learned. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't staying for the fight. It's knowing when the fight's over and you need to let people rebuild without you standing in the middle of their foundation. That sounds like something adults say when they don't want to explain the real reason. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just not good at staying in one place long enough to see how things turn out. Nora hugged him then, fierce and brief like the first time, then stepped back. When you figure out where you're going, write to Mama. Tell us you're still alive. That's all I'm asking. I can do that. Eliza was waiting by the house when Wade led Ranger out. She'd been working since dawn, her clothes dusty and her hair escaping its braid, and she looked exhausted and alive in equal measure. Leaving without saying goodbye? She asked. Was building up to it. Take your time. I've got coffee. She poured 2 cups from a pot that had been warming on the porch. They sat on the steps Daniel had